They sent her west to disappear. They were wrong. Eliza Crow weighed more than any society belle in St. Louis, and her father made sure she knew it was unforgivable. So he did what powerful men do with problems they can't control. He shipped her away. A mail-order bride arrangement to a mountain hermit nobody knew, a one-way ticket to humiliation and failure. But what her father didn't understand was this. The wilderness doesn't care about ballroom standards. It measures you by what you can endure, what you can lift, what you refuse to break under. And Eliza Crow was about to become something her father never saw coming. Unkillable. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Eliza's story travels. Hit that like button, and let's begin. The August heat in St. Louis felt like punishment. It pressed down on the Crow Mansion's marble floors, turned the air in the parlor thick and stale, made the silk drapes hang limp against windows that refused to let in a breeze. Eliza stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, the one her mother had commissioned from France before she died, and looked at herself without flinching. She was 24 years old, 5'8", strong-shouldered, thick-waisted, heavy through the hips and thighs. Her dress, a deep green that her maid had altered twice already this season, pulled across her middle no matter how carefully she breathed. Her face was pleasant enough, clear skin, strong jaw, dark eyes that missed nothing, but it wasn't her face that people noticed first. It was never her face. "Miss Eliza," the maid's voice came soft through the door. "Your father wants you downstairs." Eliza didn't answer immediately. She had studied her reflection a moment longer, this body that had caused so much trouble simply by existing, then turned away from the mirror. "I'll be down in a minute." She could hear them before she reached the bottom of the stairs. Her father's voice, that particular tone he used when he was being generous and wanted everyone to know it. The other voice belonged to someone she didn't recognize, male, older, with the carefully neutral accent of a businessman who'd learned to hide where he came from. They were in her father's study. The door stood half open, and neither man noticed her in the hallway. "Arrangement is quite straightforward," the stranger was saying. "The gentleman in question is looking for a practical woman, someone who can manage a household in difficult conditions. He's not concerned with," a delicate pause, "conventional standards of beauty." Naturally, her father's voice dripped satisfaction. "My daughter is many things, Mr. Pettigrew, but conventional is not among them." Eliza's hand tightened on the banister. "The contract is standard for these arrangements," Pettigrew continued. "Travel expenses paid, a small settlement upon arrival, and the understanding that the union is binding once she reaches Montana territory." Montana? Her father said it like he was sentencing someone to transportation. "Well, I'm sure Eliza will find it educational. The gentleman's name is Rowan Blackridge. He owns considerable property in the mountains north of Helena, lives alone, keeps to himself. The locals consider him something of an oddity." Perfect. The satisfaction in her father's voice made something cold settle in Eliza's chest. A recluse for a daughter no one wants to see. The symmetry is almost poetic. "Atia," she stepped into the doorway. Both men turned. Her father's expression didn't change. He'd mastered the art of looking at her without really seeing her years ago. Pettigrew, to his credit, only faltered for a moment before gathering himself into professional blandness. "Ah, Eliza." Her father gestured her forward like he was summoning a servant. "Come in. We were just discussing your future." "I heard." She moved into the room, and something in the way she held herself made Pettigrew shift his weight. She'd learned early that her size could be useful if you didn't try to hide it. "Montana territory, a Mr. Blackridge who lives alone in the mountains." "A tremendous opportunity," her father said smoothly. "Mr. Pettigrew has arranged everything. You'll leave next week." "And if I refuse?" The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was absolute. Her father set down the whiskey glass he'd been holding. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet. "You don't refuse, Eliza. You have no income of your own, no prospects, no friends who would take you in. I've made certain of that. You have exactly one option available to you, and that option is currently standing in this room explaining how he's solved the considerable problem of what to do with you." "The considerable problem," Eliza repeated. "You know what you are." He said it without heat, which somehow made it worse. "You know what you look like. How you embarrass this family every time you appear in public. Your sister managed to marry a senator despite your shadow hanging over everything. I won't have you ruining her position in society because you're too stubborn to disappear with grace." Pettigrew cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should—" "No." Eliza cut him off, her eyes still on her father. "Stay. I want to understand exactly what's being arranged here. This Mr. Blackridge, he knows what I look like?" "He knows you're a sturdy woman," Pettigrew said carefully. "Capable of hard work. That's what he requires." "He doesn't care that I'm fat." Her father flinched. He hated that word, hated when she said it out loud instead of pretending the problem didn't exist. "He cares that you can work," Pettigrew said. "Frontier life isn't easy. He needs someone practical." "Someone desperate, you mean?" Eliza turned to him fully. "That's what these arrangements are, isn't it? Desperate men and desperate women making bargains because they've run out of better options." "I wouldn't put it quite so—" "I would." She looked back at her father. "You're counting on me failing, aren't you? You're sending me somewhere impossible, to someone impossible, hoping I'll collapse under the weight of my own inadequacy and you'll never have to think about me again." Her father's face was stone. "I'm giving you a chance at a life, more than you deserve, frankly." "A chance?" The laugh that came out of her was sharp enough to cut. "Right. Well then, I accept your generous offer, Father. I'll go to Montana Territory, I'll marry your mountain recluse, and I'll do something you've clearly decided is impossible." "What's that?" "I'll survive." The week before departure passed in a strange, suspended way. Eliza's sister Charlotte came to visit once, swept in wearing Worth gown and careful sympathy. "I wish it didn't have to be this way," Charlotte said, perched on the edge of Eliza's bed like she might catch something from the furniture. "But you have to understand Father's position. Senator Wright's political career, depends on you being married to a respectable man with no embarrassing relatives visible at dinner parties," Eliza finished. "I understand perfectly." Charlotte's mouth thinned. "You could try to be less difficult about everything." "I could try to be less fat, too. That's what you mean, isn't it?" "I didn't say—" "You didn't have to." Eliza folded another wool dress into her trunk. "You never have to say it, Charlotte. It's written all over both of you every time you look at me." Her sister stood, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her skirt. "I hope you find what you're looking for out west. I really do." "I'm not looking for anything. I'm being sent away." "Then I hope you make the best of it." After Charlotte left, Eliza sat among her half-packed belongings and let herself feel the full weight of what was coming. Montana Territory, mountains. A stranger who needed someone practical because he couldn't get anyone better. A one-way ticket to a life her father had specifically designed to break her. She should have been terrified. Instead, something that felt almost like hunger stirred in her chest. The train west was crowded and dirty and endless. Eliza sat by the window and watched the landscape change, watched cities give way to towns, give way to nothing but grass and sky. Other passengers gave her the look she was used to. The quick assessment, the slight recoil, the careful neutrality that was somehow worse than outright disgust. A woman across the aisle leaned toward her traveling companion, not quite whispering. "Can you imagine? All the way out here and still—" "Some people just can't help themselves," the companion murmured back. Eliza turned her head and looked at them directly. Both women flushed and suddenly became very interested in the passing scenery. In Omaha, she changed trains. In Cheyenne, she changed again. By the time she reached Helena, she'd been traveling for 6 days and felt like something scraped off the bottom of civilization. The man waiting at the station wasn't Rowan Blackridge. "Miss Crow?" He was short, weathered, with the kind of sun-damaged skin that came from decades outdoors. "Name's Jack Holloway. Mr. Blackridge sent me to collect you." "He didn't come himself." "No, ma'am. He don't come to town much." Holloway grabbed her trunk like it weighed nothing. "Got a wagon outside. It's about a 4-hour ride up to the property." The wagon was exactly what she expected. Rough wood, no springs, pulled by 2 horses that looked like they'd seen better decades. Holloway helped her up with surprising courtesy, then climbed onto the driver's seat and clicked his tongue at the horses. Helena disappeared behind them. The road, such as it was, wound up into mountains that made the hills around St. Louis look like gentle suggestions. Pine trees crowded close on both sides. and the air smelled like resin and something wilder underneath. The higher they climbed, the cooler it got, until Eliza was grateful for her wool shawl. "What's he like?" she asked after an hour of silence. Holloway spat tobacco juice over the side of the wagon. "Who, Rowan?" "Mr. Blackridge. Big, quiet, keeps to himself mostly, like I said. Known him about 7 years now. He's fair in his dealings. Don't talk much, but when he does, he means what he says. That's not really an answer." Holloway was quiet for a long moment. "He's a hard man, Miss Crow. Not mean, but hard. Life up here makes you that way. He needs a wife who can handle it." "Handle what?" "The mountain. The winters. Being alone most of the time." He glanced at her sidelong. "You ever worked hard, miss? Real work, I mean." "No." "Well." Another stream of tobacco. "You're about to learn." They stopped once to rest the horses and let Eliza stretch her legs. The stream they paused beside ran so cold it hurt her teeth when she cupped a handful to drink. Holloway produced bread and cheese from somewhere in the wagon, and they ate standing up because there was nowhere else to sit. "How much farther?" Eliza asked. "Another 2 hours or so. Road gets rougher from here." He wasn't exaggerating. The last stretch of trail was barely wide enough for the wagon, rocky and steep enough that Eliza had to grip the seat to keep from being thrown out. The trees pressed closer, blocking out most of the sky, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Then they rounded a final bend, and Holloway said, "There." The cabin sat in a clearing carved out of the forest. It was bigger than Eliza expected. 2 stories, solid-looking, with a steep roof and a stone chimney already sending up smoke. A barn stood off to one side, and beyond it she could see what looked like a chicken coop and a vegetable garden gone mostly to seed this late in the season. And in front of the cabin, standing perfectly still with an axe in one hand, was the biggest man Eliza had ever seen. He had to be 6.5 feet tall, maybe more. Broad through the shoulders in a way that made the axe look like a toy. Dark hair pulled back from a face that was all hard angles and watchful eyes. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, a shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, boots that had seen serious use, and he didn't move at all as the wagon approached. Holloway pulled the horses to a stop. "Afternoon, Rowan. Brought your bride." Rowan Blackridge set the axe down carefully against the chopping block. His eyes settled on Eliza, and she made herself meet that gaze without flinching. He looked at her for a long moment, not the quick, assessing glances she was used to in street, Lewis, but a thorough, considering examination that took in everything: her size, her posture, the way she held herself in the wagon seat. "You're heavier than I expected," he said finally. His voice was deep, rougher than his appearance suggested. Beside her, Holloway tensed. Eliza felt something cold and familiar settle in her stomach. Here it was. The rejection. The confirmation that even at the end of the world, she was still too much of a problem to... "Good," Rowan continued. "You'll need the strength." She blinked. "What?" He moved to the side of the wagon, and up close he was even more imposing. But his hands, when he reached up to help her down, were careful. "Winters are hard here. Food can get scarce. The work doesn't stop just because it's cold. Having some weight on you might be what keeps you alive." Eliza let him help her down because she genuinely couldn't think of what else to do. His hands were rough with calluses, but surprisingly warm. When her feet hit the ground, she had to tilt her head back to look at him properly. "I don't understand," she said. "Which part? You don't care that I'm..." She gestured at herself, unable to quite finish the sentence. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Fat? No, why would I?" The bluntness of it shocked her into a laugh. "Because everyone else does. Everyone else isn't trying to survive a Montana winter." He stepped back, giving her space. "Jack, help me get her trunk inside. Miss Crow, come look at the cabin. We need to discuss the arrangement." The inside of the cabin was warmer and more organized than she expected. The main room served as kitchen and living space, with a table, chairs, a wood stove already radiating heat, and shelves stocked with supplies. A ladder led to what had to be a sleeping loft. Through a doorway, she could see another room, maybe for storage or sleeping. Rowan set her trunk down near the stove. Holloway tipped his hat. "I'll be heading back before dark. Good luck to you both. Then they were alone. Eliza stood in the middle of the cabin, this stranger's home that was supposed to become hers, and felt the full weight of the situation settle over her. She'd come 2,000 miles. She'd left behind everything she knew, however terrible it had been. And now she was standing in a room with a man she'd met 5 minutes ago who she was supposed to marry and share a life with. The arrangement, Rowan said, is this. We'll marry as soon as we can get a preacher up here, which won't be until spring most likely. Until then, you sleep in the back room, I sleep in the loft. You help with the work around the property, cooking, preserving food, tending the animals. In exchange, you get shelter, food, and protection. Fair? Fair, Eliza echoed numbly. I don't expect you to know how to do any of this yet. You'll learn. I'm not patient, but I'm thorough. If you put in the work, you'll manage. He paused. Any questions? About 1,000, but she settled on the most immediate. Why did you agree to this? You could have what? Found some delicate woman who'd cry at the first snow and expect to be waited on? I need a partner, Miss Crow. Someone who can work. Everything else is decoration. She studied him, this strange, blunt man who'd just turned her entire understanding of herself sideways. You really don't care what I look like. I care that you're here. I care that you agreed to come. Everything else we'll figure out. He moved to the stove, lifted the kettle. Coffee? Yes. Please. While he poured, Eliza walked to the window and looked out at the clearing, the forest beyond, the mountains rising in the distance. This was her life now. No ballrooms, no society, no careful whispers behind fans, just trees and sky and work, and this enormous, bewildering man who measured value in ways she'd never encountered before. She should have been terrified. Instead, that hungry feeling in her chest grew stronger. The first week nearly killed her. Not literally, though there were moments when Eliza wondered if dying might actually be easier than what Rowan was asking her to do. But every muscle she didn't know she had announced itself through screaming pain. Her hands, soft from a lifetime of having servants do anything difficult, blistered within 2 days. Her back ached from hauling water from the stream. Her shoulders burned from learning to split kindling. Rowan didn't mock her. He also didn't go easy. You're holding the axe wrong, he said on the third morning when she'd been trying for 20 minutes to split a log and managed only to embed the blade so deep she couldn't pull it out. You're trying to muscle it. Let the weight do the work. I am letting the weight. No, you're fighting it. He moved behind her, and she tensed as his hands covered hers on the axe handle. Like this. Lift, let it drop. The blade's heavy enough. You just guide it. His chest was against her back, his arms bracketing hers. Eliza's face burned with something that wasn't quite embarrassment. Now, he said quietly, and lifted with her, then let the axe fall. The log split clean. Oh, she breathed. Again, without me this time. She managed it on the second try, then the third. By the 10th split log, her arms felt like they might fall off, but the woodpile was actually growing. Rowan nodded. Good. Finish this stack, then come inside. I'll show you how to render fat. Rendering fat turned out to be exactly as disgusting as it sounded. Eliza stood over a pot of bubbling pork trimmings, stirring and trying not to gag, while Rowan cleaned a rabbit he'd trapped that morning. Why can't we just buy lard in town? She asked. We could, but town's 4 hours away, the trail's only passable half the year, and buying what you can make yourself is wasteful. He looked up from the rabbit. You tired? Yes. Good tired or bad tired? She thought about it. I don't know. Both? That's normal. You're using your body different than before. It'll adjust. He went back to the rabbit. You're stronger than you think. I don't feel strong. You split wood for an hour and you're still standing. Most women from back east would have quit after 10 minutes. He sectioned the rabbit with quick, efficient movements. That's strength. Not the pretty kind, maybe, but the kind that matters. Something about the way he said it, casual, matter-of-fact, like he was commenting on the weather, made Eliza's throat tight. My father sent me here to fail, she said quietly. Rowan's knife paused. I know. How could you possibly? Because men like your father don't send daughters to the frontier for any good reason. They send them to disappear. He set the knife down, met her eyes across the cabin. He made a mistake, though. What mistake? He thought the frontier would break you. But the frontier doesn't care about what you look like or who your father is. It only cares about what you can do, and from what I've seen so far, you can do plenty. Eliza had to look away before she embarrassed herself by crying. 2 weeks in, she learned what Rowan meant about the winters. The temperature dropped 20 degrees overnight. She woke to frost on the inside of the window, and Rowan already stoking the fire back to life. "Storm coming," he said without preamble. "Big one. We need to get the animals secured and bring in extra wood before it hits." They worked through the morning in grim silence. The chickens had to be locked in the coop with extra feed. The horses needed to be brought into the barn, along with enough hay to last days if the snow got too deep. Wood had to be stacked inside the cabin, not just near it, because once the storm hit in earnest, they might not be able to get to the outdoor pile. By noon, the first flakes were falling. By evening, Eliza couldn't see the barn from the cabin window. She'd never seen snow like this. In St. Louis, snow was an inconvenience, something servants dealt with while you stayed warm inside. Here, snow was something that could kill you if you weren't prepared. "Come away from the window," Rowan said. He was at the table, sharpening knives with long, methodical strokes. No point watching it. Eliza sat across from him. The cabin was warm, almost cozy with the storm raging outside. They had food, fire, shelter. They were safe. "How long will it last?" she asked. "Day, maybe 2. Hard to say." He tested the edge of the knife against his thumb. "You scared?" "Should I be?" "No. We're prepared. That's the difference between living and dying out here. Preparation." He set down the knife, picked up another. "You've done well these past 2 weeks." The compliment caught her off guard. "I've barely managed not to hurt myself." "That's more than most people accomplish in twice the time." He looked at her directly, and in the firelight his face was less severe. "You're tougher than you were told to be." "My father would disagree." "Your father's an idiot." She laughed before she could stop herself. "You can't say that." "Why not?" "It's true. Any man who'd throw away a daughter like you over something as stupid as her size is too dumb to deserve respect." He went back to sharpening. "You're worth 10 of whatever delicate flower he'd have preferred." Eliza sat very still, afraid that if she moved or spoke, she might shatter whatever fragile thing was happening between them. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled. And somewhere in the space between those two sounds, Eliza felt the first crack in the armor she'd built around herself for protection. The storm lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning, Eliza woke to silence and sunlight streaming through frost-covered windows. The world outside looked like it had been remade entirely in white. Drifts higher than her waist, trees bent under the weight of snow, everything transformed into something both beautiful and lethal. Rowan was already moving, dressed for the cold in heavy wool and furs. "We need to dig out," he said. "Check on the animals, clear paths. You up for it?" Every muscle in her body said no. Her mouth said yes. They worked in shifts, him breaking trail, her widening the path behind him. The snow was heavy, wet, and endless. Eliza's shoulders screamed, her legs burned. Sweat froze on her face despite the exertion, but she kept moving. The barn was half buried. They had to dig through a drift just to get the door open. Inside, the horses stamped nervously but were otherwise fine. The chickens, too, had survived, huddled together for warmth in their coop. "Good," Rowan said, checking water levels. "Everyone made it. Now we just need to—" The crack was so loud it sounded like a gunshot. Rowan's head snapped up. "Out! Now!" "What?" "Move!" He grabbed her arm and yanked her toward the door just as the roof gave way. They tumbled out into the snow as timber and debris crashed down where they'd been standing seconds before. Eliza landed hard on her side. The wind knocked out of her, and by the time she could breathe again, Rowan was pulling her to her feet, his face furious and frightened in equal measure. "Are you hurt?" His hands moved over her shoulders, her arms, checking. "Eliza, are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine, but stay here." He left her standing in the snow and went back into the barn. Or what was left of it. What? Half the roof had caved in under the weight of snow and ice, and through the gap she could hear the horses screaming. Eliza followed him without thinking. I told you to stay. The horses are trapped. One of them was already down, tangled in fallen timber, eyes rolling white with panic. The other was trying to climb over the debris and only making things worse. Rowan swore viciously and started pulling boards aside. They were heavy, frozen together with ice, and even with his strength, it was slow going. Eliza grabbed the other end of a beam. Tell me what to do. You can't. Tell me what to do. He looked at her for one long second, then nodded sharply. On 3, we lift. Don't try to throw it, just get it clear of the horse. 1, 2, 3. They lifted. Eliza's back nearly gave out. Her arms shook. But she held on, and together they managed to shift the beam just far enough that the trapped horse could scramble free. They worked like that for the next hour, lifting, pulling, clearing debris, while the cold bit through their clothes and the horses panicked around them. Eliza stopped thinking about whether she could do it, and just did it. When Rowan needed something moved, she moved it. When he needed leverage, she provided it. When he needed someone to hold a frightened horse steady while he freed its trapped leg, she held that animal like her life depended on it. By the time they got both horses clear and secured in what remained of the barn, the sun was setting and Eliza literally could not feel her hands. Rowan locked the makeshift gate they'd rigged. His face was gray with exhaustion, and there was blood on his coat from where a falling board had caught his shoulder. You're hurt, Eliza said. It's nothing. Come on. We need to get inside before we freeze. The cabin felt impossibly warm after the brutal cold outside. Rowan built up the fire while Eliza's hands slowly came back to agonizing life. Then he sat at the table and started trying to shrug out of his coat. The board had torn through the fabric and into the muscle beneath. It wasn't deep, but it was bad enough that he couldn't raise his arm properly. Let me, Eliza said. You can't reach it properly. Let me. He went still while she carefully peeled the coat away from the wound. The shirt beneath was stuck to it with dried blood. She had to use warm water to soak it free, and even then he hissed when she pulled the fabric clear. Sorry, she murmured. It's fine, there's a medical kit in the loft. Bring it down. She climbed the ladder, the first time she'd been up there, and found herself in a surprisingly neat space. A bed, neatly made, a chest for clothes, a window facing east, and on a shelf near the bed, a small wooden box. The medical kit was basic but well stocked. She brought it down and set to work cleaning the wound with steady hands that surprised her. Where did you learn this? Rowan asked. My mother. Before she died, she insisted I know basic medical care, said you never knew when it might matter. Eliza threaded a needle she'd sterilized in the fire. This is going to hurt. Everything hurts right now. She stitched the wound closed with small, careful stitches. Rowan didn't flinch, but his breathing went careful and controlled. When she tied off the thread and bandaged it, his whole body relaxed. Thank you, he said quietly. Thank you for pulling me out of that barn before it fell on my head. Thank you for not listening when I told you to stay put. She looked up and found him watching her with something she couldn't quite name in his expression. In the firelight, with his guard down from exhaustion and pain, he looked younger, less like a force of nature, and more like just a man. We make a good team, he said. Yeah, Eliza agreed softly. We do. Winter settled in hard after that. The barn took 2 weeks to rebuild. They worked on it every day the weather allowed, and Eliza learned more about construction than she ever imagined needing. How to measure timber, how to sink posts, how to shingle a roof so the snow would slide off instead of accumulating. Her hands, already rough from splitting wood, developed new calluses. Her shoulders got broader. Her arms showed muscle she'd never seen before. One morning, she caught her reflection in the small mirror over the wash basin and barely recognized herself. Her face was the same, but everything else had changed. She stood differently, straighter, more solid, like she was planted in the earth instead of trying to disappear into it. Her body was still heavy, still large, but now when she looked at it, she saw what Rowan saw. Strength, capability, the physical resources to survive. You're staring, Rowan said from behind her. She jumped slightly. You look different, he continued, moving to pour coffee. Stronger. I feel different. Good. He handed her a cup. Because spring's going to be harder than winter in some ways. Planting, building, getting ready for next year. I'll need you. I'll need you. 4 words that shouldn't have meant as much as they did. They fell into rhythms. Morning chores, afternoon work, evening meals prepared together in comfortable silence. Rowan taught her to track game in the snow, to tell which plants were safe to harvest even in winter, to read weather signs in the sky. She taught him to make bread that didn't come out like a brick, to organize the supplies so they could find things without searching, to appreciate that some conversations were worth having even if they didn't serve an immediate practical purpose. And slowly, carefully, something neither of them had planned for began to grow. It started with small things. The way Rowan would hand her coffee in the morning, just how she liked it. The way Eliza made sure his coat was dry before he went out into the cold. The way they'd started sitting closer together in the evenings, until sometimes their shoulders touched and neither of them moved away. One night, deep in February, they sat by the fire after a long day rebuilding fence posts. Rowan was whittling something he had a habit of carving when he was thinking, and Eliza was mending a tear in her work dress. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. "Always. Why did you really agree to the mail order arrangement? You could have managed alone." His knife stilled. "Could have. Didn't want to." "That's not an answer." He was quiet for a long moment, then set down the knife and the half-carved piece of wood. "I came out here 7 years ago running from something. Spent those 7 years alone, mostly by choice. Built this place, made it work. And somewhere in there I realized I'd built a life, but I wasn't living it. Just surviving, day after day, nothing but work and sleep and more work." He looked at the fire, not at her. "Figured if I was going to survive, might as well have someone to survive with." "That's the most practical proposal I've ever heard." "Didn't know it was a proposal." Eliza set down her mending. "What would you call it? Hope? Maybe?" He finally looked at her, and the vulnerability in his expression made her breath catch. "Hope that someone could come out here and not leave, not look around this place, this life, and decide it wasn't enough." "Rowan, you could still leave," he said quietly. "Spring comes. You could go back. Tell them it didn't work. I'd give you money for passage, enough to start somewhere new if you wanted. You're not trapped here." Eliza stood, crossed the small space between them, and sat down right next to him, close enough that their arms pressed together. "I'm not leaving," she said firmly. "You say that now, but Rowan Blackridge, look at me." He did. "I spent 24 years in St. Louis being told I was a problem to solve. Too big, too heavy, too much. An embarrassment, a burden, something to hide." She took his hand, rough and calloused and warm. "You know what you've never once made me feel?" "What?" "Small. In a bad way, I mean. You've never tried to shrink me down or apologize for me or wish I was different. You just let me be exactly what I am and told me it was useful. Do you have any idea how radical that is?" He turned his hand over, lacing their fingers together. His hand dwarfed hers, but the grip was gentle. "You're useful. More than useful. I don't know how I managed before you." "You managed fine." "I survived. That's not the same thing." They sat like that, hands clasped, the fire warm on their faces, while outside the wind howled and the mountains stood eternal watch. And Eliza thought about her father's plan, his certainty that she would fail, his satisfaction at shipping her off to certain humiliation. He was going to be so disappointed when he found out how thoroughly wrong he'd been. "We should get married properly," Rowan said suddenly. "Soon as the preacher can make it up here. If you want to, I mean, I want to." "Good. Because—" He stopped, struggling with words in a way she'd never seen. "I'm not good at this. Talking about feelings, making pretty speeches. But you should know that you're—" Eliza leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't practiced or elegant. She'd never kissed anyone before. And clearly he hadn't either in a long time. Their noses bumped. She had to angle her head weird. It was brief and awkward and absolutely perfect. When she pulled back, Rowan was staring at her with wonder. "Oh," he said. "Yeah," she agreed. "Oh." Spring came late and hard. The snow melted in floods that turned the clearing into mud, and they spent weeks just managing drainage so the cabin didn't wash away. But when the ground finally dried enough to work, They planted a garden twice the size of the previous year. Eliza learned to coax seeds into growth, to thin seedlings, to protect tender plants from late frosts. The preacher arrived in early May, riding a mule and complaining about the terrible road. He married them in the clearing with Jack Holloway and his wife as witnesses, and the ceremony took all of 10 minutes. Eliza Crow became Eliza Blackridge. That night, in the loft that had been Rowan's alone for 7 years, he pulled her close and whispered against her hair, "I love you." "I love you too," she whispered back, "even though you're terrible at saying it. I'll get better with practice." "You'd better. We've got a lot of years ahead of us." They did. Years of building and growing and learning, years of hard work and harder winters and small, fierce joys carved out of an unforgiving landscape. Years of being exactly who they were, without apology or shame. But that was still to come. For now, in the warm darkness of the loft, with the mountains standing guard outside, Eliza felt something she'd never quite managed before. Home. Their first summer as a married couple taught Eliza what real partnership looked like, and it wasn't anything like the pale imitations she'd seen in St. Louis drawing rooms. It was Rowan teaching her to shoot, his hands steady on her shoulders as he corrected her stance. Breathe out, then squeeze. Don't pull the trigger, just apply pressure until it surprises you. The rifle kicked hard enough to bruise her shoulder. The tin can 50 yards away stayed exactly where it was. "Again," Rowan said. By the end of the afternoon, she'd hit 3 out of 10. By the end of the week, she was hitting 7. A month later, she brought down her first deer, a clean shot through the chest that dropped it where it stood. Rowan field-dressed it while she watched, teaching her the process. You take a life, you use everything. That's the rule. Meat for eating, hide for leather, bones for tools. Nothing wasted. "That's a good rule," she said quietly. "It's the only rule that matters out here." He looked up at her, his hands bloody to the wrists. "You all right? Some people can't handle this part." "I'm fine." And she was. Death didn't bother her the way it might have a year ago. Out here, death was just part of the cycle. Necessary, respectful, honest. "Show me how to do the next one myself." By late July, the garden was producing more than they could eat fresh. Eliza spent long days learning to preserve everything, canning beans and tomatoes, drying herbs, salting meat, storing root vegetables in the cold cellar Rowan had dug beneath the cabin. Her hands were permanently stained from handling beets, and she'd burned herself on hot jars more times than she could count, but the satisfaction of seeing shelves fill with food they'd grown themselves was worth every blister. One evening, while she was processing the last of the day's cucumber harvest into pickles, Rowan came in from checking traps with a strange expression on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "Nothing's wrong. There's someone coming up the trail. A wagon." Eliza's stomach tightened. They hadn't had visitors since Jack Holloway brought supplies 3 weeks ago. "Who?" "Don't know yet. But whoever it is, they're struggling. Wagon sounds like it's barely holding together." They went outside together. In the distance, Eliza could hear it now. The creak of wood, the labored breathing of horses, and underneath it all, a thin sound that might have been crying. The wagon that finally limped into the clearing was in worse shape than anything Eliza had seen. One wheel was cracked, the canvas cover was torn, and the 2 horses pulling it looked like they might collapse at any moment. On the driver's seat sat a woman maybe 30 years old, gaunt and exhausted, and in the back, "Are those children?" Eliza started forward before Rowan could stop her. There were 3 of them, a girl maybe 8 years old, a boy around 6, and a baby that couldn't have been more than a year. All of them were too thin, too quiet, too still. The woman on the driver's seat swayed, caught herself, and tried to speak. What came out was barely a whisper. "Please, we haven't eaten in 2 days. My husband, he's dead. Fever took him outside of Helena. I'm trying to get to my sister in Oregon, but we're... She didn't finish. Her eyes rolled back and she toppled sideways off the seat. Rowan caught her before she hit the ground. "Eliza, get the children." The next hours passed in controlled chaos. They got the woman, her name was Sarah Mitchell, into the cabin and onto the bed in the back room. The children were brought in and fed carefully, slowly, because Eliza had learned enough to know that starving people couldn't eat normally without getting sick. The horses were tended to, though one of them was so far gone that Rowan had to put it down mercifully in the barn. Sarah woke after dark, disoriented and frightened until she saw her children sleeping safely by the fire. "Easy," Eliza said, pressing a cup of weak broth into her hands. "You're safe. The children are fine. Drink this slowly." We don't have money to pay you. We're not asking for money." Eliza sat on the edge of the bed. "You're hurt and your children are hungry. That's enough reason to help." Sarah's face crumpled. "Tom got sick so fast. One day he was fine, the next he was burning up, and then he was just gone. I buried him myself because I couldn't afford anyone to do it proper. I thought if I could just get to Oregon, to my sister, we'd be all right. But the wagon keeps breaking and the food ran out and—" "You're here now," Eliza said firmly, "and you're going to rest and eat and let your children recover. Then we'll figure out the next step. I can't impose, you're not imposing. You're surviving. There's a difference." Over Sarah's shoulder, Eliza could see Rowan watching from the doorway. When their eyes met, he nodded slightly. They were in agreement without needing to speak. The Mitchell family stayed. Not permanently. Sarah was clear that she needed to reach her sister. But for the 6 weeks it took to repair the wagon properly, build up the children's strength, and prepare them for the rest of the journey. In that time, Eliza learned things about herself she hadn't known were there. She learned she was patient with children in a way she'd never had the chance to discover before. The oldest girl, Mary, was quiet and watchful, used to taking care of her younger siblings. Eliza taught her to gather eggs, to identify edible plants, to move through the world with confidence instead of fear. The boy, James, was more open, full of questions that Rowan answered with surprising gentleness. And the baby, little Thomas, spent most of his time on Eliza's hip while she worked, growing stronger on goat's milk and mashed vegetables until his cheeks filled out and he smiled. She also learned that the body she'd spent so long hating was exactly what these children needed. When Mary had nightmares and came seeking comfort, Eliza's soft lap and strong arms were a refuge. When James scraped his knee and needed holding, her size meant safety. When Thomas needed carrying while Sarah rested, Eliza's strength made it effortless. One afternoon, while the children napped, and Sarah was helping Rowan repair the wagon wheel, Eliza sat on the porch steps with Thomas sleeping against her shoulder. The weight of him, warm and trusting, made something ache in her chest. "You're good with him," Sarah said, walking over to check on the baby. "Natural mother." "I don't know about that." "I do. You've got the gift for it. Patience and firmness in equal measure. That's rare." Sarah sat beside her, wiping grease from her hands. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "How did you end up here? You talk like you're educated. Your hands, well, they're working hands now, but they weren't always. You came from somewhere else." Eliza looked out at the clearing, the garden thriving in the summer heat, the mountains standing eternal in the distance. "I came from St. Louis. My father sent me west as a mail-order bride because I embarrassed him. I was too fat for society." Sarah blinked. "Too fat?" That's what he thought. What everyone thought. Eliza shifted Thomas to her other shoulder. "Turned out the frontier had different standards." "Turned out your father was an idiot," Sarah said flatly. "You're one of the strongest women I've ever met. You and Rowan both, you saved our lives. We'd have died on that trail if you hadn't taken us in." "Anyone would have—" "No, they wouldn't have. We passed 2 other homesteads before we got here. Both turned us away. Said they couldn't afford to feed extra mouths." Sarah's voice went hard. "You didn't even hesitate. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she just held the sleeping baby and let the words settle into her bones. When the Mitchells finally left in early September, wagon repaired and supplies restocked, Mary cried and clung to Eliza's skirts. James made Rowan promise to teach him to track animals if he ever came back. And Sarah hugged Eliza so hard it hurt. "If you're ever near Portland," Sarah said, "you find me. You hear? My sister runs a boarding house on 3rd Street. You ever need anything at all, you come to us." "I will," Eliza promised. They watched the wagon disappear down the trail, and when it was gone, the clearing felt emptier than it had before. "You're sad," Rowan observed. "I'm going to miss them." "Me too." He put an arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his solid warmth. "You were good with those children. Really good. They were easy to be good with." "That's not what I mean." He was quiet for a moment. "Would you want that? Children of our own?" Eliza's breath caught. They'd never discussed it, though the thought had been circling in her mind for weeks. Would you? I think so. Not right now. We've got too much to do before winter. But someday. He looked down at her, and his expression was open in a way it rarely was. I think you'd be an amazing mother. I think I'd like to see that. I think I'd like that too. They stood there together as the sun set, painting the mountains gold and purple, and Eliza felt the future stretch out before them, full of possibility. But the future, she was about to learn, had other plans first. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks later, in the form of Jack Holloway riding up the trail on a lathered horse, his face grim. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. "Big one." Rowan was already moving, bringing Jack's horse water, getting the man himself settled at the table. "Talk!" "There's a land company been buying up property all through the territory. Mountainside Development Corporation, they call themselves. Run by a man named Darius Kincaid out of San Francisco. They've been offering people money for their land, good money, or so it seems at first. But the contracts are rigged. People sign thinking they're selling and then find out they've actually signed over mineral rights, water rights, everything. Company takes the land, keeps the rights, and the original owners are left with nothing. That's not legal, Eliza said. It is if you've got lawyers who know how to write contracts that look fair but aren't. And Kincaid's got the best. Jack accepted the coffee Rowan poured him. He's already taken 6 properties in the valley. Folks are getting desperate. This doesn't affect us, Rowan said slowly. We're too far up the mountain. No access for mining equipment, water's not reliable enough for commercial use. We're worthless to a development company. That's what I thought too. Until I saw this. Jack pulled a folded paper from his coat. Found it posted in Helena. Legal notice of survey. They're planning to run a road right through your property. Eliza took the paper, studied it. The language was dense, legal, but the map was clear enough. A proposed road cutting through their land marked as necessary for territorial development and approved by... This isn't signed by anyone, she said sharply. It's a survey proposal, not an approved plan. Both men looked at her. What? Rowan asked. Look at the bottom. No signatures, no official seals. This is a threat, not a legal document. They're trying to scare you into selling before they have to go through proper channels. She set the paper down. My father used tactics like this all the time. Make people think the decision's already made so they don't fight back. Smart, Jack said appreciatively. But that doesn't mean they won't try to make it official. No, it doesn't. Eliza's mind was already working, pulling from years of watching her father manipulate business deals and legal systems. We need to file a counterclaim, establish our property rights legally before they can challenge them. And we need to document everything. Boundaries, water sources, structures, everything that proves we've been here and made improvements. Rowan was watching her with something like awe. You know how to do that? I grew up watching my father destroy people with paperwork. I paid attention. She looked at Jack. How many other homesteaders are dealing with this? At least a dozen that I know of, probably more. Then we organize, pool resources, share legal strategies. They're counting on people being isolated and scared. We take that advantage away. You sound like a general planning a campaign, Jack said. I sound like someone who's tired of powerful men thinking they can take whatever they want. Eliza stood, started pacing. Rowan, we need to ride to Helena, file the proper claims, talk to the territorial land office, make ourselves legally bulletproof. Jack, can you spread the word to the other homesteaders? We should meet, coordinate. I can do that. Good. We move fast, we move together, and we don't let them isolate us. She looked at Rowan. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning. They rode out at dawn, leaving the cabin secured and the animals tended. The trail to Helena was rough, but Eliza had traveled it enough times now that it didn't frighten her anymore. She rode the horse Rowan had taught her to handle, keeping pace beside him, her mind turning over strategies and possibilities. You're quiet, Rowan said after an hour. I'm thinking. About? About how my father would handle this, what moves he'd make. She glanced at him. I know how men like Kincaid think. They assume people out here are simple, uneducated, easy to manipulate. That's their weakness. What's our strength? We're not simple, we're not alone, and we're not going anywhere. The territorial land office in Helena was a small building that smelled like dust and old paper. The clerk behind the desk looked up as they entered, his expression already bored. Help you? We need to file a formal property claim, Eliza said, including improvements, water rights, and mineral rights for a homestead in the northern mountains. The clerk sighed. You and everyone else this week, there's a backlog. Then we'll wait. Eliza didn't move. However long it takes. Something in her tone made the clerk actually look at her. You got your paperwork? We have our original homestead filing, records of improvements, and witness testimony from our nearest neighbors. She set the folder she'd prepared on the counter. Everything you need is here. We just need it officially recorded before someone tries to claim our land isn't properly documented. The clerk flipped through the papers, his boredom shifting to something like respect. This is thorough. Most people come in here with half of this missing. We're not most people. It took 3 hours of waiting, form filling, and fee paying, but when they left the land office, they had official documentation of their claim, properly recorded and sealed. It wouldn't stop Kincaid from trying, but it would make it significantly harder. Next stop, Eliza said, is the newspaper. The newspaper? If Kincaid's operating through intimidation and shady contracts, the best weapon we have is exposure. People need to know what's happening. The Helena Weekly Messenger was run by a man named Tom Bradford, who listened to their story with increasing interest while taking notes in rapid shorthand. This is good, he said when they finished. Real good. People need to know about this kind of corruption. You willing to go on record? Absolutely, Eliza said. The article ran 2 days later, front page. Land grab threatens mountain homesteaders. Kincaid Corporation uses deceptive contracts to seize property. It named names, detailed tactics, and included testimony from 3 different families who'd been cheated. The response was immediate. By the time Eliza and Rowan made it back to their cabin, Jack was waiting with news that a dozen homesteaders wanted to meet, coordinate, fight back together. The territorial governor's office had opened an investigation into Kincaid's business practices, and Darius Kincaid himself had sent a message. What kind of message? Rowan asked. Jack handed over a letter. The paper was expensive, the handwriting precise. It was addressed to Mr. Rowan Blackridge and wife. Rowan read it aloud. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Blackridge, I understand there has been some confusion regarding my company's intentions in your area. I would very much like to meet with you to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. I will be in the Helena area next month and would welcome the opportunity to visit your property and speak in person. I believe we can reach an understanding that serves everyone's interests. Respectfully, Darius Kincaid. That's a threat, Eliza said immediately. How is that a threat? He's asking to talk. He's asking to visit our property, to see it for himself, assess its value, figure out our weaknesses. She took the letter, studied it. And he's doing it in writing, which means he's confident. He thinks he can handle us. Can he? Eliza looked up at her husband, this man who'd given her a home and a purpose and a life worth fighting for. Not even close. The meeting with the other homesteaders happened in the barn of a family named Peterson, about 2 hours south of Rowan and Eliza's property. 15 people showed up, men and women, young and old, all of them worn down by hard living but not yet broken. Eliza stood in front of them and spoke clearly. Kincaid is counting on us being divided, scared, too busy surviving to organize. So we're going to prove him wrong. We're going to document everything, file every claim, record every improvement, witness each other's boundaries. We're going to share information. If he approaches any of you, everyone needs to know about it. And we're going to make enough noise that ignoring us becomes more expensive than leaving us alone. An older man named Henderson raised his hand. What if he doesn't care about noise? What if he just brings men with guns and takes what he wants? Then we make sure the territorial authorities know that's what he's planning. We make it public. We make it expensive. Eliza met his eyes. I come from money, real money. I know how people like Kincaid think. They'll take risks, but only calculated ones. If we make this fight too public, too costly, too likely to damage his reputation with investors, he'll move on to easier targets. You really think we can win this? A woman asked. I think we can make winning too expensive for him to bother, which amounts to the same thing. They left that meeting with a plan. Documentation, coordination, public pressure. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. 2 weeks later, Darius Kincaid came to visit. He arrived in a carriage that had no business being on a mountain trail, pulled by horses that cost more than most homesteads. Two men rode alongside, guards, obviously, though they weren't wearing badges. Kincaid himself was in his 50s, well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Eliza and Rowan met him in the clearing. Neither of them was armed, but Rowan's rifle was visible on the porch, and Eliza had made sure the neighbors knew when to expect this visit. "Mr. Blackridge. Mrs. Blackridge." Kincaid climbed down from the carriage with practiced ease. "Thank you for seeing me." "You didn't leave us much choice," Eliza said coolly. "Your letter wasn't really a request." Kincaid smiled. "Direct. I appreciate that. May we speak inside?" "We can speak right here," Rowan said. "Of course." Kincaid gestured to the clearing, the cabin, the barn. "You've built something impressive here. Real frontier spirit. I respect that." "But," Eliza prompted, "but the territory is growing. Development is coming whether we want it or not. Roads, rail lines, commerce. Your property sits in the path of that development. I'm offering you a chance to benefit from it instead of being crushed by it. By selling to you. By partnering with me. I'm prepared to offer you triple what this land is worth. Cash payment, immediate transfer. You could buy property anywhere, start fresh somewhere easier." "We don't want somewhere easier," Rowan said flatly. "Everyone wants easier, Mr. Blackridge. They just don't always admit it." Kincaid turned to Eliza. "Mrs. Blackridge, you strike me as a practical woman. Surely you understand the mathematics here. You can't stop progress. The road will be built. If you don't sell now, you'll be offered half as much later, or nothing at all." Eliza smiled, and it wasn't friendly. "Mr. Kincaid, you strike me as a man who's used to people being intimidated by confidence and expensive suits. Unfortunately for you, I grew up around men exactly like you. I know every trick you're trying to pull." His expression flickered. "The proposed road survey you've been waving around? It's not approved. The territorial development claims you're citing. Half of them are pending review, which you conveniently don't mention. The triple value you're offering? It's based on an assessment that undervalues the land by 60% to begin with." She took a step closer. "I've read your contracts, Mr. Kincaid, the ones your lawyers think are so clever. They're fraud, and you know it." "That's a serious accusation. It's a documented fact. The Helena Weekly Messenger seems to think so. The Territorial Governor's Office seems to think so. 3 different legal experts seem to think so." Eliza crossed her arms. "You came here expecting simple homesteaders you could bully or buy. You got me instead. Bad luck." Kincaid was very still. Then he laughed, sharp and without humor. "I see. Well, Mrs. Blackridge, since we're being honest, you're right. I did expect simple homesteaders, but you've shown me I need to adjust my approach. Your approach should be leaving us alone. Unfortunately, that's not possible. This land is valuable, more valuable than you realize, and I will have it, one way or another." He climbed back into his carriage. "I've given you the chance to benefit from this situation. If you refuse to be reasonable, the consequences are yours to manage." The carriage pulled away, leaving deep ruts in the clearing. Rowan looked at Eliza. That was a threat. That was a promise. She watched the carriage disappear down the trail. "He's going to come after us now, harder than before. Can we stop him?" "I don't know, but we're going to try." That night, lying in the darkness of their loft, Rowan said quietly, "You didn't have to make an enemy of him. You could have been more diplomatic." Diplomatic doesn't work with men like Kincaid. They see diplomacy as weakness. The only thing they respect is equal force. "And you think we have that?" Eliza rolled over to face him, though she could barely see him in the dark. "I think we have something he doesn't expect. We have each other. We have neighbors who will stand with us. We have legal documentation and public awareness and the fact that we're not going anywhere." She found his hand, laced their fingers together. "He's used to people being alone and scared. We're neither." "He could make life very difficult." "Life's already difficult. That's what we do. We handle difficult." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not losing this place, Rowan. I'm not losing this life. Whatever it takes." "Whatever it takes," he agreed softly. But as Eliza drifted towards sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was only just beginning. The feeling proved right faster than Eliza expected. 3 days after Kincaid's visit, their water supply stopped running. Not slowly, not with warning, just stopped. Rowan found the problem within an hour. Someone had deliberately diverted the stream that fed into their property, redirecting it with rocks and logs arranged too precisely to be natural. "This took time," he said, standing knee-deep in the creek bed upstream. "And effort. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Eliza stared at the dry channel that should have been flowing with clear mountain water. How long to fix it? 2 days? Maybe 3? They don't come back and do it again. He climbed out of the stream bed, water running from his boots. "This is Kincaid. Obviously. So what do we do?" Eliza was already thinking, running through options. "We fix it. We document it. Photographs if we can get someone up here with a camera. Written testimony at minimum. We report it to the territorial marshal. And we make sure everyone knows this is what happens when you refuse Kincaid's offers." They spent the next 2 days rerouting the water, working from dawn until dark, moving rocks and clearing channels. Jack Holloway brought 2 other men to help, and together they managed to restore the flow. But the message was clear: Kincaid could reach them whenever he wanted. A week later, someone cut their fence line and ran off half their chickens. The week after that, a fire started in the woodpile, small enough that they caught it before it spread, but clearly deliberate based on the kerosene smell. "He's trying to break us down," Rowan said after they'd put out the fire. His face was black with soot, his hands blistered. "Make us too tired and scared to fight." "Then we don't give him the satisfaction." Eliza's jaw was set hard. "We keep fixing what he breaks. We keep documenting. We keep fighting." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." But the attacks were taking their toll. They couldn't leave the property unguarded, which meant one of them was always watching while the other worked. They slept in shifts, the garden suffered from lack of attention, and the constant vigilance wore on them both in ways that were hard to admit. Then, in late October, everything escalated. Eliza was in the barn feeding the horses when she heard voices in the clearing. Male voices, multiple, none of them familiar. She grabbed the rifle Rowan had insisted she keep close and moved to the barn door. 4 men stood in front of the cabin. They weren't trying to hide themselves. In fact, they seemed to want to be seen. All of them were armed. One of them was knocking on the cabin door with exaggerated politeness. "Mr. Blackridge, Mrs. Blackridge, we'd like a word if you don't mind." Poor Rowan appeared in the doorway, and Eliza's heart seized when she saw he was unarmed. He must have been working inside when they arrived. "Can I help you?" His voice was level, but Eliza could see the tension in his shoulders. "We're here on behalf of Mountainside Development Corporation," the spokesman said. He was younger than the others, well-dressed for the frontier. "Mr. Kincaid sent us to discuss your continued resistance to a very generous offer." "There's nothing to discuss. The property's not for sale." "See, that's where you're wrong." The spokesman's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's for sale. It's just a matter of price. And Mr. Kincaid's prepared to be very reasonable about that price. Assuming, of course, that there's still something here worth buying." One of the other men, older, scarred across the cheek, stepped forward. "Be a shame if something happened to this nice cabin you've built. Accidents happen all the time out here, fires mostly. Mountain living's dangerous." Eliza stepped out of the barn, rifle raised and aimed. "Get off our property." All 4 men turned. The spokesman's smile widened. "Mrs. Blackridge, there you are. We were hoping to speak with you as well. You've spoken. Now leave." "That's not very neighborly." "You're not neighbors. You're hired thugs making threats on behalf of a man who's too much of a coward to do his own dirty work." Eliza kept the rifle steady. She'd never pointed a weapon at a person before, but her hands didn't shake. "I'm giving you to the count of 10 to get back on your horses and ride out. After that, I start shooting." The scarred man laughed. "You're not going to shoot anyone, lady. You don't have the—" Eliza fired. The bullet kicked up dirt 2 inches from the man's boot. The sound echoed off the mountains, sharp and final. 9, Eliza said calmly, already working the bolt to chamber another round. The 4 men exchanged glances. The spokesman's smile had vanished. "This isn't over." 8. They mounted up, but slowly, making it clear they were choosing to leave rather than being forced. The spokesman paused before turning his horse. You've made a serious mistake, Mrs. Blackridge. Mr. Kincaid doesn't forgive easily. 7. They rode out. Eliza kept the rifle up until they disappeared down the trail, then slowly lowered it. Her hands were shaking now, delayed reaction setting in. Rowan crossed the clearing in 3 long strides and pulled her against him. "Are you all right?" His voice was rough. "I'm fine. Are you?" "You just shot at 4 armed men." "I shot near 4 armed men. There's a difference." She leaned into him, letting his solidity steady her. "They were going to burn us out, Rowan. You heard them." "I heard them." He pulled back to look at her face. "You were incredible and terrifying." "Good. Maybe they'll think twice before coming back." But even as she said it, Eliza knew better. Men like that didn't back down because of 1 warning shot. They escalated. And now she and Rowan had made themselves into a problem that needed solving. That night, they sat at the table with Jack Holloway and 2 other homesteaders, Tom Peterson and a woman named Sarah Chen, who'd bought property the previous spring. "It's getting worse everywhere," Tom said. "The Hendersons had their barn burned down last week. The Millers woke up to find all their cattle gates open and half their herd scattered. Kincaid's men are getting bolder." "The territorial marshal won't do anything?" Eliza asked. Jack shook his head. "Marshal's office says they need proof. Witnesses who will testify. Nobody wants to come forward because they're scared, and without testimony, the marshal's hands are tied." "What about the governor's investigation?" "Moving slowly. You know how these things work. Committees, hearings, legal reviews. Meanwhile, people are losing their land every week." Sarah Chen leaned forward. "We need to fight back. Actually fight back, not just document and complain." "How?" Rowan asked. "Patrols, organized watches. If Kincaid's men know we're coordinated, that we're watching out for each other, maybe they'll think twice. Or maybe they'll bring more men and overwhelm us anyway," Tom countered. "We're talking about homesteaders against professional thugs. That's not a fair fight." "Fair doesn't matter," Eliza said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "Fair never mattered. This has always been about whether we're willing to fight harder than they're willing to push. Sarah's right. We need to be organized, coordinated, but Tom's also right that we can't win a straight fight." She stood, started pacing. "So we don't fight straight. We make it expensive. We make it public. We make sure every attack gets reported, documented, turned into ammunition against Kincaid's reputation and business interests." "That's a long game," Jack said. "People need help now." "Then we help now and play the long game. Patrols, yes. Watches, yes. But also lawyers, newspapers, public pressure. We fight on every front we can until something breaks." "Or until we break," Tom muttered. "Then we don't break." Eliza met his eyes. "I didn't come this far, build this life, just to surrender because some rich man decided he wants my land. Did you?" Slowly Tom shook his head. "Then we stand, together, and we make Kincaid regret ever hearing our names." The patrols started the next day. Rotating watches, coordinated signals, shared intelligence about where Kincaid's men had been spotted. It wasn't perfect. They were spread thin, always reactive rather than proactive. But it was something. For 3 weeks it seemed to work. The attacks slowed. Kincaid's men were spotted but didn't engage. Maybe, Eliza let herself hope, they'd made their point. Then Rowan got hurt. It happened on a cold November morning. He was checking the trap line alone. Eliza had stayed back to finish preserving the last of the root vegetables when he found one of their traps sprung and empty. Not unusual by itself, but something made him cautious. He circled wide, looking for signs of what had taken the catch. He didn't see the tripwire until he'd already stumbled over it. The fall itself wasn't bad. What was bad was the deadfall trap someone had rigged in the trees above, meant for animals, but deadly to a human who triggered it from the wrong angle. A log the size of a man's torso came swinging down and caught Rowan across the ribs and shoulder. He managed to roll, which probably saved his life. But the impact still drove him into the ground hard enough to crack ribs and dislocate his shoulder. He lay there in the frost-stiffened grass, unable to breathe properly, vision graying at the edges, and thought very clearly, "I'm going to die out here." Then he heard hoofbeats. Jack Holloway found him 20 minutes later, alerted by Rowan's horse returning to the barn riderless. By the time they got Rowan back to the cabin, he was unconscious from pain and blood loss where the log had torn open his shoulder. Eliza took one look at him and went completely cold and focused. Get him on the table. Jack, I need hot water, clean cloths, and the medical kit. Now. She'd learned field medicine from necessity over the past year, but this was beyond anything she'd dealt with. The shoulder was visibly wrong, the ribs were at minimum cracked and possibly broken, and the bleeding wouldn't stop no matter how much pressure she applied. Should I ride for the doctor and Helena? Jack asked. He'd be dead before you got back. Eliza's hands were steady even though her heart was racing. I have to set the shoulder myself. Hold him down. What followed was brutal. Rowan screamed when she pulled his shoulder back into place, even unconscious. The ribs she could only wrap and hope they'd heal clean. The bleeding she finally controlled with pressure and stitches that would leave terrible scars but would hold. By the time she finished, it was dark outside, and she was covered in Rowan's blood. Jack had stayed through all of it, helping when needed, steady as a rock. You did good, he said quietly. Real good. He's going to make it. You don't know that. I do. I've seen men hurt worse than this survive. He's strong, and he's got you. That's enough. Rowan developed a fever that night. Eliza sat beside him with cold cloths and willpower, refusing to let him slip away. She talked to him even though he couldn't hear, telling him about the garden plans for next spring, about how the roof needed patching before winter, about all the things they still had to do together. You don't get to leave me, she said fiercely at one point, gripping his uninjured hand. You hear me, Rowan Blackridge? You brought me out here and made me fall in love with this life. You don't get to leave me to handle it alone. His fever broke on the third day. On the fourth day, he opened his eyes and croaked, Water. Eliza cried while she helped him drink. Recovery was slow and frustrating. Rowan couldn't do heavy work for weeks, which meant everything fell on Eliza. She handled it, splitting wood, hauling water, tending animals, keeping watch, but the exhaustion went bone deep. Jack helped when he could, and other neighbors brought food and supplies, but ultimately it was Eliza who kept everything running. And through it all, one thought burned in her mind. Kincaid did this. Maybe not directly. Maybe it really was just a trap meant for animals that Rowan triggered by bad luck. But the trap line had been clear 2 days before. Someone had set that deadfall. And whether it was Kincaid's men or just the general chaos his presence had created, the responsibility was the same. By the time Rowan was well enough to sit up without help, Eliza had made a decision. I'm going to St. Louis, she said. He stared at her. What? My father has records, business documents, contracts, letters. Everything he's ever done is filed away in his study because he's obsessive about documentation. If Kincaid's methods are anything like my father's, there'll be evidence of fraud, of other properties he's stolen, of patterns we can use against him. She sat on the edge of the bed. I need those records. Eliza, your father disowned you. He's not going to just hand over. I'm not going to ask him. I'm going to take them. She met his eyes. He'll be at his club Thursday evenings. He always is. Cards, whiskey, business deals, and back rooms. The house will be empty except for servants, and I know how to get into his study without being seen. I spent half my childhood hiding in there. This is insane. This is necessary. We can't fight Kincaid with just local resources. He has too much money, too many lawyers. But if I can prove he's done this before, if I can find evidence of his methods, we can take it to federal authorities. Make this bigger than territorial politics. And if you get caught, then I get caught, but at least I'll have tried. She took his hand carefully, mindful of his injuries. Rowan, he nearly killed you. That trap could have... Her voice broke. I can't just sit here waiting for the next attack. I need to do something. We're supposed to do things together. You can barely walk to the outhouse without help. Someone needs to stay here, keep the property running, maintain the patrols. She squeezed his hand gently. Let me do this, please. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, How long? 3 weeks, maybe 4. Train to St. Louis, get what I need, train back. That's a long time to be alone. Jack and the others will check on you. And you're healing. By the time I get back, you'll probably be chopping wood again just to prove you can. She managed to smile. Besides, I'm not the same woman who came out here scared and helpless. I know who I am now. I know what I can do. Yeah, Rowan said softly. You do. She left a week later, once she was satisfied Rowan could manage basic tasks without hurting himself. Jack promised to check in daily. Sarah Chen agreed to handle the patrol coordination, and Eliza packed a small bag with her plainest clothes and enough money to get her to St. Louis and back. Rowan held her at the door. Be careful. Always. And Eliza, whatever you find in that study, remember why you're doing this. It's not about your father. It's about us, this place. Don't let him get in your head. I won't. But as the train carried her east, watching the landscape change from mountains to plains to the familiar rolling hills of Missouri, Eliza felt old anxieties creeping back. The closer she got to St. Louis, the more she could feel that old version of herself trying to resurface. The girl who'd been too big, too wrong, too much. She shut it down hard. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who could shoot straight, split wood, save her husband's life, and stare down armed thugs without flinching. Her father's opinion of her didn't matter anymore. St. Louis looked smaller than she remembered. The mansion on Lindell Boulevard was the same, imposing, expensive, deliberately designed to intimidate. But seeing it again, Eliza felt nothing but contempt for the kind of wealth that needed to prove itself so loudly. She didn't go to the front door. Instead, she waited until Thursday evening, watched her father's carriage leave for his club, then approached from the servants' entrance. The cook recognized her immediately. Miss Eliza? Lord above, we thought... I need your help, Mrs. Brennan. Eliza kept her voice low. I need to get into my father's study without anyone knowing I was here. Mrs. Brennan had been with the family for 20 years. She'd fed Eliza cookies when she was sad and covered for her when she'd sneaked books she wasn't supposed to read. Now she looked at this woman who'd left as a girl and come back as something harder, and she nodded slowly. He keeps the study locked now. Ever since you left, he's been paranoid about, well, I don't know what, but I've got a spare key. Can you get it? 10 minutes later, Eliza was in her father's study, with the door locked behind her, and 2 hours before he'd returned from his club. The filing system was exactly as she remembered. Alphabetical, obsessively organized, color-coded by type of document. She started with the K section and found it immediately. A folder labeled Kincaid Darius Intit Yamsichko, Mountainside Development Corp. Inside were letters, lots of them. Correspondence going back 3 years, discussing investments, partnerships, joint ventures. Her father had money in Kincaid's company. Not just money, he was one of the primary investors. Eliza's hand shook as she read through the documents. Her father hadn't just invested. He'd helped design the contract strategy. The deliberately confusing language, the hidden clauses, the legal traps that made it nearly impossible for property owners to fight back. Her father's legal expertise was all over it. There was more. Letters discussing specific properties, including... Eliza stopped breathing. There was a letter about her, about the arrangement that had sent her to Montana. The arrangement with Blackridge serves multiple purposes, her father had written to Kincaid. It removes an embarrassment from my household while positioning someone in the territory who can provide intelligence on which properties might be vulnerable to acquisition. Once Eliza has established herself, she can assist in identifying landowners who might be convinced to sell, particularly if her marriage provides her with local credibility. She read it 3 times, making sure she understood. Her father hadn't sent her away just to get rid of her. He'd sent her as a spy, a tool to help Kincaid steal land from people like Rowan, like Jack, like all the homesteaders who'd become her friends and allies. The marriage was supposed to give her access, credibility, information she could feed back to her father and Kincaid. She was supposed to be their inside source. Rage, cold, and absolute settled over her. She photographed every document with the small camera she'd brought. Then she dug deeper, looking for anything else that might be useful. She found correspondence with lawyers, contracts with men who were clearly enforcers, records of payments made to territorial officials for favorable rulings. It was all there. Everything they needed to prove Kincaid's operations were criminal, that he had powerful backers, that the corruption went deeper than anyone had realized. She was so focused on the documents that she didn't hear the door open behind her. I knew you'd come back eventually. Eliza spun around. Her father stood in the doorway, still in his evening clothes, looking at her with an expression that wasn't quite surprise. Mrs. Brennan told you I was here, Eliza said flatly. Mrs. Brennan is loyal to this family. Unlike some people. He stepped into the study, closed the door. What are you doing with my files? Finding evidence of your crimes. She didn't back down, didn't shrink. You're one of Kincaid's investors. You helped him design the contracts he uses to steal land. I helped him design a legal strategy for property acquisition. There's nothing criminal about that. There is when the strategy is built on fraud and intimidation. Her father waved that away. You don't understand business, Eliza. You never did. This is how the world works. People who can't protect their assets lose them to people who can. It's natural selection. It's theft. It's progress. He moved to his desk, poured himself a drink. The Montana Territory needs development. Kincaid's company will bring roads, rail lines, commerce. The few homesteaders who lose their properties are acceptable casualties in service of the greater good. The greater good being your profit. The greater good being civilization. He sipped his whiskey. Those people you're so concerned about, they're barely educated, barely civilized. They squat on land they don't have the resources to properly develop and call it homesteading. What Kincaid does is make that land productive. Eliza looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for the first time in her life. Not as an authority figure or a source of approval she could never quite earn, just as what he was, a small, greedy man who justified cruelty by calling it commerce. You sent me to Montana as a spy, she said. He didn't deny it. I sent you to be useful for once in your life. Instead, you've apparently decided to play homesteader and work against your own family's interests. Rowan is my family now. Jack and Sarah and Tom and everyone else Kincaid's trying to destroy, they're my family. You're just the man who thought you could get rid of me and make money doing it. Don't be dramatic. You are never going to make a suitable marriage here. I gave you an opportunity. You gave me to a stranger and hoped I'd fail. She gathered the documents she'd photographed. But I didn't fail. I survived. I built a life. I married a man who actually values me instead of being ashamed of me. And now I'm going to use everything you taught me about how powerful men operate to bring down your business partner. Her father set down his glass carefully. If you try to use those documents against Kincaid, you'll be implicating me as well. You'd destroy your own father's reputation. I know. Eliza, I'm taking these to federal authorities. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you and Kincaid have been doing. And when it all falls apart, when your investors pull out and your reputation is ruined and you're facing criminal charges, I want you to remember something. What's that? You did this. Not me. You created this situation when you decided your own daughter was disposable. When you tried to use me as a tool in your schemes, you brought this on yourself. She walked to the door. Her father moved to block her path, and for a moment Eliza saw something like fear in his eyes. You can't leave with those documents. I won't allow it. You don't get to tell me what I can and can't do anymore. She looked at him levelly. Move. Eliza, be reasonable. We can work something out. If it's money you need, I don't need anything from you. I haven't needed anything from you since the day I got on that train west. She stepped forward, and her father actually backed up. Move, or I'll move you myself. He moved. Eliza walked out of the study, through the house she'd grown up in, and out the front door. Behind her, she heard her father shouting something, but she didn't look back. She had what she needed. Everything else was just noise. The train west couldn't move fast enough. Eliza made it as far as Chicago before the telegram caught up with her. She was changing trains, waiting in the crowded station with her bag clutched tight, and the photographed documents hidden in the lining of her coat when a porter approached with a yellow envelope. Mrs. Blackridge? Wire for you, ma'am. Her heart stopped. The only people who knew her route were Rowan and Jack, and neither of them would send a telegram unless something was desperately wrong. She tore it open. Kincaid's men came. Rowan injured again. Situation bad. Come home. Jack. The paper crumpled in her fist. She'd been gone 3 weeks. 3 weeks in which she'd thought the patrols and watches would be enough, that Kincaid would wait, that Rowan would be safe. She'd been wrong. The next train west didn't leave for 6 hours. Eliza spent every minute of that wait wound tight with fear and fury, imagining every possible disaster. By the time she finally boarded, she was running on nothing but coffee and adrenaline. The journey to Helena took 4 days. 4 days of forced stillness while her mind spun through increasingly terrible scenarios. Rowan dead. The cabin burned. Jack killed trying to defend their property. Everything they'd built reduced to ash because she'd left when she should have stayed. She arrived in Helena after midnight, exhausted and half mad with worry. There was no one waiting at the station. She hired a horse, overpaid for it, didn't care, and rode through the darkness toward the mountain trail. Dawn was breaking when she finally reached the clearing. The cabin was still standing. That was the first thing she registered, and the relief was so intense it made her dizzy. But as she got closer, she could see the damage. Windows broken, door hanging crooked on its hinges, bullet holes stitched across the front wall, in a pattern that made her stomach turn. She tied the horse and ran inside. "Rowan, in here!" His voice came from the back room, rough but alive. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, his left arm in a makeshift sling, his face swollen and bruised. But he was breathing. He was alive. Eliza dropped to her knees beside him. "What happened?" "They came 3 nights ago. 8 of them, maybe more. Said we had one last chance to sell or they'd make sure there was nothing left to sell." He grimaced as he shifted position. "I told them to get off my property. They didn't like that." "Your arm." "Broken." Jack said it, but it's bad. "Ribs too, same ones as before." He looked at her with exhausted eyes. "They beat me pretty good, Eliza. Would have been worse, but Jack showed up with Tom and Sarah. Guns convinced them to leave." "Where's Jack now?" "Riding between properties, trying to coordinate everyone. It's not just us. Kincaid hit 4 homesteads that night, burned Henderson's barn to the ground, ran off the miller's livestock, beat Peterson so bad he can't work." Rowan's good hand found hers. "It's war now. Not threats, not intimidation. Actual war." Eliza felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. "I have the evidence. Everything we need to prove what Kincaid's doing, who's backing him. My father's involved. He's one of the primary investors." Rowan stared at her. "Your father?" "He sent me here as a spy. The marriage. Everything. It was supposed to position me to help Kincaid identify vulnerable properties." She pulled the documents from her coat lining. "But I've got proof now. Contracts, letters, financial records. Enough to bring federal charges against both of them." "How long until we can use it?" "I don't know. Days? Weeks? Legal processes don't move fast, and Kincaid has lawyers who will fight every step." She looked at the broken windows, the bullet holes. "We might not have weeks." "No," Rowan agreed quietly. "We might not." They sat in silence for a moment, the morning light streaming through the damaged cabin, and Eliza made a decision. "I'm going to see Kincaid." "Absolutely not. I'm going to offer him a deal. The documents in exchange for him leaving, not just us, but everyone. All the homesteaders. Complete withdrawal from the territory." "Eliza, he'll never agree to that. And even if he did, you can't trust him to honor it." "I know, but I need to try. I need him to know what I have, what I can do to him if he doesn't back down." She stood, started checking Rowan's injuries with practiced hands. "And I need to buy time for the legal process to work. This is insane. This whole situation is insane. I'm just trying to find a way through it that doesn't end with you dead or our home burned down." She rewrapped his ribs carefully. "Jack said Kincaid's staying in Helena. Some hotel, the Grand. He took over the entire top floor." Rowan caught her wrist gently. "Don't do this. Let me come with you. You can barely stand, and someone needs to stay here. Keep watch." She kissed his forehead. "Trust me. I know how to handle men like him." "That's what worries me." She rode back to Helena that same morning, tired enough that she swayed in the saddle but too angry to care. The Grand Hotel was the finest building in town, all gilt and crystal, trying very hard to pretend it wasn't surrounded by frontier mud and rough timber. The desk clerk tried to stop her. "Mr. Kincaid isn't receiving visitors." "Tell him Eliza Blackridge is here with documents from her father's files. Tell him if he doesn't see me in the next 5 minutes, those documents go straight to the federal prosecutor." She leaned on the desk, let him see exactly how serious she was. 5 minutes. Kincaid received her in a suite that probably cost more per night than most homesteaders made in a month. He was dressed for business, every inch the successful entrepreneur, and he smiled when she entered like they were old friends. "Mrs. Blackridge, What a pleasant surprise. Cut it. Eliza dropped her bag on his expensive table. You had my husband beaten. You're burning people out of their homes. This stops now. I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about. If there's been violence in the territory, I assure you my company has nothing to do with... I have proof. She pulled out the documents, spread them across the table. Letters between you and my father. Contracts showing the fraud. Financial records proving the whole operation is criminal. I have everything. Kincaid's smile didn't waver, but something cold entered his eyes. Your father is a respected businessman. These documents, if they even exist, are privileged correspondence. They're evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, among other charges. And they're already copied and secured with the lawyer in St. Louis who has instructions to release them if anything happens to me. She hadn't actually done that yet, but he didn't need to know. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw from the Montana Territory completely. You're going to void all the contracts you forced people into. And you're going to do it quietly, without causing more damage. Or what? Or I take these to federal authorities and make sure everyone knows exactly how you operate. Your investors will scatter. Your political connections won't save you. And your reputation, everything you've built, will be destroyed. She leaned forward. I grew up watching my father play these games. I know how men like you think. You only care about profit and appearance. I'm offering you a way to cut your losses and walk away. Kincaid studied her for a long moment. Then he laughed, sharp and genuine. You really think you can threaten me? A homesteader's wife with some documents and a lot of nerve? I don't think I can threaten you. I know I can destroy you. Eliza kept her voice level. The question is whether you're smart enough to recognize it. Let me tell you what I recognize, Mrs. Blackridge. I recognize a desperate woman making empty threats because she's run out of options. Those documents? Even if they're real, they prove nothing illegal. Business correspondence, investment records, my lawyers will tie those up in court for years. Meanwhile, you and your husband and all your homesteader friends will lose everything. He stood, moved to the window. You want to know what's going to happen? I'm going to finish acquiring the properties I want. The few holdouts who refuse to sell will find life increasingly difficult until they either give in or leave. And there's nothing you can do to stop it because you're nobody. You have no power, no influence, no resources. I have the truth. The truth? Kincaid turned back to her. The truth is that progress requires sacrifice. The truth is that the Montana Territory needs development, and I'm the one providing it. The truth is that history will remember me as a builder, and you as an obstacle that got cleared away. He sat down again, his expression almost pitying. Go home, Mrs. Blackridge. Take care of your injured husband. Accept the generous offer I'm about to make. $50,000 for your property, more than it's worth. Enough to start over somewhere civilized. No. Then you're a fool. He gestured to the door. We're done here. Eliza gathered the documents slowly, deliberately. You're right about one thing. I am desperate, but that makes me dangerous, not weak. And you just made a mistake. What mistake? You assumed I came here to negotiate. She tucked the documents back into her bag. I didn't. I came here to give you one chance to do this the easy way. You refused, so now we do it the hard way. She walked out before he could respond. The federal prosecutor's office was in a building that smelled like old leather and older tobacco. The prosecutor himself, a tired-looking man named Arthur Webb, listened to Eliza's story with the expression of someone who'd heard 1,000 similar complaints and believed maybe half of them. Mrs. Blackridge, these are serious allegations. They're documented facts. She laid out the photographs of her father's files. Everything's here. The investment structure, the fraudulent contracts, the payments to territorial officials for favorable rulings. Webb examined the documents carefully. Some of this is certainly concerning, but building a federal case takes time. Months, possibly years. And Mr. Kincaid has considerable legal resources. People are being beaten. Property is being destroyed. How much time do we have while you build a case? I understand your frustration, but the law moves at its own pace. The law moves at the pace powerful men allow it to move, Eliza said sharply. I've watched it my whole life. My father destroyed competitors using legal tactics that should have landed him in prison, but he had the right friends and enough money to make problems disappear. She leaned forward, I'm not asking you to rush. I'm asking you to care enough to try. Webb was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. I'll open an investigation. I can't promise anything beyond that, but I'll look into it personally. These documents, may I keep copies? That's why I brought them. Good. Give me 2 weeks to review everything and make preliminary inquiries. If what you're saying is accurate, we may be able to move faster than usual. He looked at her seriously. But Mrs. Blackridge, you need to understand something. If Kincaid suspects a federal investigation is coming, he may escalate. Men like him don't react well to being cornered. I know, but doing nothing isn't an option anymore. She left Webb's office with a fragile hope that the law might actually work, for once, in favor of people without power or money. But she also knew Webb was right about the timeline. 2 weeks was an eternity when you were waiting for the next attack. The ride back to the mountain took most of the day. Eliza pushed the horse harder than she should have, desperate to get home, to see Rowan, to make sure everything was still standing. The sun was setting when she finally reached the trail that led to their property. She smelled smoke before she saw it. Her heart seized. She kicked the horse into a run, careening around the final bend into the clearing, and saw the cabin was fine. The barn was fine. But beyond them, in the forest where their property bordered Jack Holloway's land, smoke rose thick and black into the evening sky. Rowan was on the porch, rifle in his good hand, watching the tree line. He turned when he heard her approach. They're burning the forest, he said without preamble. Started about 2 hours ago. Jack rode over to warn us, then went to get help from the other homesteaders. Eliza dismounted, staring at the smoke. How bad? Bad enough. Wind's blowing away from us for now, but if it shifts... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. A forest fire in these mountains, in late fall when everything was dry, could consume hundreds of acres. It could destroy not just their property, but every homestead in the valley. It could kill people. This is Kincaid, Eliza said. Obviously. He's trying to burn us out, all of us at once. Yeah. Rowan's face was grim. Question is, what do we do about it? Before Eliza could answer, riders appeared through the smoke. Jack, Tom Peterson, Sarah Chen, and at least 6 others, all of them looking frightened and furious in equal measure. It's spreading fast, Jack said, reining in his horse. Already jumped the creek in 2 places. We need every able body we can get to fight it, or we're all going to lose everything. Where do we start? Eliza asked. Fire break. We dig a line, clear everything down to bare dirt, hope it stops there. Jack looked at Rowan. You can't dig with that arm. I can keep watch. Make sure Kincaid's men don't use the chaos to cause more damage. Good. Everyone else grab tools and follow me. They worked through the night. Eliza had thought she knew what hard labor felt like, but this was different. This was digging in hard earth until your hands bled, hauling water in buckets to wet down the fire break, clearing brush and timber while smoke choked your lungs and embers fell like deadly snow. The fire crept closer. They dug faster. Tom Peterson collapsed around midnight, overcome by smoke. Sarah Chen took an ember to the arm that burned through her shirt to the skin beneath. One of the other homesteaders, a young man named David, twisted his ankle in a gopher hole and had to be carried back. But they kept digging. By dawn, they had a fire break 200 yards long and 15 feet wide, a scar of bare earth cutting through the forest. It wasn't pretty, and it might not be enough, but it was something. The fire reached it around 8 in the morning. Everyone stopped work and watched, exhausted and filthy and terrified, as flames licked up to the edge of the break. Some embers jumped across, started small fires on the other side, but people were ready with water and shovels to beat them out. The main fire hit the break and stalled. It burned hot along the edge, trying to find a way across, but there was nothing left to burn. Slowly, starved of fuel, it began to die down. By noon, it was over. The forest on the far side of the break was blackened and destroyed, hundreds of acres reduced to ash and charred stumps. But the homesteads were safe. The cabins, the barns, the lives people had built, all of it survived. People sat in the dirt, too tired to celebrate, too relieved to move. Eliza found Rowan where she'd left him, still watching the tree line, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. "It's out," she said. "I know, I watched." He lowered the rifle carefully. "You look like hell. You should see yourself." She sat down beside him heavily. "We did it, though. We stopped it. This time. What about next time?" "There won't be a next time." Eliza's voice was hard. "Kincaid just showed his hand. He tried to burn us out, and there'll be evidence, whoever set that fire, wherever they started it, and that evidence goes straight to the federal prosecutor. Evidence takes time to gather. We don't have time. Then we make time." She looked at him. "I'm done playing defense, Rowan. I'm done waiting for Kincaid to attack and scrambling to respond. It's time to take the fight to him." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." Jack approached before Rowan could respond, looking as exhausted as Eliza felt. "Found something you need to see, where the fire started." They followed him into the burned forest, picking their way through ash and fallen timber. About a quarter-mile in, Jack stopped and pointed. 3 oil cans lay in the ash, partially melted but still recognizable. And next to them, a piece of cloth that had somehow survived the fire. Rough canvas with letters stenciled on it. MDC, Mountainside Development Corporation. "That's evidence," Jack said. "Proof that Kincaid's men started this." Eliza picked up the cloth carefully. "Get someone with a camera up here. Document everything. The cans, the cloth, where the fire started. And get testimony from everyone who fought it. Times, locations, who saw what." "You think the law will actually do something this time?" "I think if they don't, we'll make sure everyone knows they chose to protect a rich criminal instead of honest people." She looked at the destruction around them. "Either way, this ends. Soon." The next few days passed in tense watchfulness. The homesteaders organized themselves into a more formal cooperative, shared patrols, coordinated legal strategy, pooled resources for hiring a lawyer who could fight Kincaid in court. The evidence from the fire was documented and sent to Arthur Webb's office. And Eliza waited for Kincaid's next move, knowing it would come. It came 5 days later, but not in the form she expected. A rider arrived at the cabin in the afternoon, a young man Eliza didn't recognize. He handed her a letter sealed with red wax, then rode away before she could ask questions. Inside was a single page, written in elegant script. "Mrs. Blackridge, I believe we got off on the wrong foot. I would like to propose a meeting on neutral ground to discuss a resolution that benefits everyone involved. Tomorrow at noon, the Helena Rail Station. Come alone. I assure you this is a genuine offer of negotiation. DK." Rowan read it over her shoulder. "It's a trap." "Probably. So you're not going." Eliza folded the letter carefully. "I'm absolutely going." "Eliza," he's finally worried. That's what this means. The fire didn't work, the violence didn't work, and now the federal investigation is making him nervous. So he's trying negotiation, which means we have leverage. She looked at him. "I need to know what he's willing to offer, and I need him to understand that we're not backing down." "Then I'm coming with you. Your arm is still broken and you can barely ride. You'd be a liability, and we both know it." She softened her tone. "Stay here. Coordinate with Jack and the others. If this is a trap, I'll need people ready to respond. If it's a trap, you'll need people there with you. I'll be in public, in Helena, in broad daylight. Whatever Kincaid's planning, he can't do it there without witnesses." She hoped that was true. "Trust me. Please." He didn't like it. She could see that in every line of his body, but eventually he nodded. "If you're not back by evening, I'm coming after you, broken arm or not." "Fair enough." She rode to Helena the next morning, arriving with time to spare. The rail station was busy with the usual traffic, travelers, freight handlers, vendors selling food and newspapers. Eliza positioned herself where she could see anyone approaching and waited. Kincaid arrived precisely at noon, alone as promised. He looked tired, she noticed. The confidence he'd worn like armor during their last meeting had developed cracks. "Mrs. Blackridge, thank you for coming. What do you want?" "To end this situation before it becomes more damaging for both of us." He gestured to a bench. "Please, sit." Eliza remained standing. "Talk." Kincaid sighed. "Very well. I underestimated you. I admit that freely. You're more resourceful, more determined, and significantly more dangerous than I anticipated. The documents you have, if they reach the wrong people, if this federal investigation proceeds, it could be very costly for my business interests." "Good. So I'm prepared to make you an offer. A real one, not the insult I proposed before. He pulled an envelope from his coat. $100,000. Cash. In exchange for the documents, your agreement to stop cooperating with federal investigators, and your withdrawal from the territory. Eliza laughed. You think I can be bought? Everyone can be bought, Mrs. Blackridge. It's just a matter of price. $100,000 is enough to start over anywhere you want. You and your husband could live comfortably for the rest of your lives. Except I'd have to live knowing I sold out everyone who trusted me, everyone who fought beside me, everyone who's counting on those documents to bring you down. She shook her head. No deal. $200,000. No. Mrs. Blackridge, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You're offering me money to betray my principles, my friends, my home. There's no amount that makes that acceptable. She leaned forward. But I'll make you a counteroffer. Leave the territory. Void all your fraudulent contracts. Compensate the families you've damaged. Do that, and maybe, I'll consider not pursuing criminal charges against you personally. That's not a negotiation, that's a surrender. Yes, Eliza agreed. It is. Kincaid's face hardened. You're making a terrible mistake. No. You made the mistake when you assumed I was someone you could intimidate or buy off. She started to turn away, then stopped. One more thing. The fire you had set? We have evidence. Physical evidence with your company's name literally on it. That's arson, Mr. Kincaid. Federal crime. Even your lawyers can't make that disappear. She walked away while his face was still registering shock. The ride back to the mountain should have felt triumphant. She'd faced down Kincaid twice now, refused his money, made it clear she wouldn't be moved. But something nagged at her, some instinct that said this wasn't over, that a cornered animal was more dangerous than an confident one. She pushed the horse faster. The sun was setting when she reached the trail to their property. She could see smoke again, not the thick black of a forest fire, just the normal gray of a cook fire from their cabin's chimney. Then she heard gunshots. Eliza kicked the horse into a run, reckless on the darkening trail, her heart hammering. More shots, a whole volley of them, coming from the direction of the clearing. She rounded the last bend and saw chaos. At least a dozen armed men surrounded the cabin. Rowan was inside, returning fire from broken windows, his rifle working despite his injured arm. Jack's horse stood riderless near the barn, which meant he was probably inside with Rowan. And in front of the cabin, directing the attackers with calm authority, was Darius Kincaid. He'd followed her. While she was riding home, he'd gathered his men and come to finish this personally. Eliza didn't think. She just acted. She rode straight into the clearing, standing in her stirrups, screaming at the top of her lungs. Federal Marshal! Federal Marshal coming through! It was a complete bluff. There was no marshal. But in the confusion and the fading light, several of Kincaid's men turned, startled. That moment of distraction was enough. Rowan and Jack burst from the cabin, rifles firing. Tom Peterson and Sarah Chen appeared from the tree line behind Kincaid's men, adding their own guns to the fight. Suddenly, the attackers found themselves caught between multiple firing positions. They broke. Men scattered, running for their horses, abandoning the fight in pure panic. Kincaid shouted orders that nobody followed, his authority evaporating as quickly as his advantage. Eliza rode straight at him. He saw her coming and reached for a gun, but she was faster. She launched herself from the saddle, hit him hard enough to knock them both to the ground. They rolled in the dirt, struggling, and Eliza felt a savage satisfaction as her fist connected with his jaw. You tried to kill my husband, she shouted, hitting him again. You burned our forest, you... Hands pulled her off him. Rowan, blood running from a cut on his forehead, but alive and furious. Eliza, stop! We have him. She looked around. Kincaid's men were gone, fled into the darkness. Kincaid himself was on the ground, bleeding from his nose, his expensive clothes torn and filthy. And standing in a rough circle around them were homesteaders. Not just Jack and Tom and Sarah, but at least 15 others, all armed, all looking at Kincaid like they wanted to finish what Eliza had started. Someone get rope, Jack said grimly. We're taking him to the territorial marshal. Let the law handle this. The law won't do anything, one of the other homesteaders said. He'll buy his way out like always. Maybe, but we do this right. Jack looked at each person in turn. We're not killers. We're not vigilantes. We're people trying to live according to the law. So we turn him over to authorities and trust the process. And if the process fails, Sarah asked, then we figure out what comes next. But we try it the right way first. They bound Kincaid's hands and put him on a horse. The ride to Helena took most of the night, a grim procession of armed homesteaders delivering a man who'd tried to destroy them. The territorial marshal took one look at the group and sighed. What's this about? Arson, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, and about a dozen other charges, Eliza said, handing over the documentation they'd gathered. This is Darius Kincaid, and we have witnesses, evidence, and federal interest in prosecuting. The marshal examined the papers with increasing concern. Federal interest? Prosecutor Arthur Webb's office. You can contact him directly. Eliza met the marshal's eyes. This is happening whether you help or not. Question is whether you want to be on the right side of it. The marshal looked at Kincaid, then at the crowd of determined homesteaders, and made his choice. I'll hold him for the federal authorities, pending investigation. See that you do, Jack said quietly, because we'll be checking. They left Kincaid in a cell, still bleeding, still furious, and rode back toward the mountains as dawn broke over the territory. Eliza sat beside Rowan on the wagon bench. Someone had brought the wagon for him since he couldn't ride easily with his injuries, and felt the weight of the past weeks finally catching up with her. Is it over? She asked quietly. I don't know. Maybe. Rowan put his good arm around her shoulders. But we're still here, still standing. Barely. Barely counts. He kissed the top of her head. You were incredible back there. Terrifying, but incredible. I thought he was going to kill you. He tried. Didn't work. Rowan's voice was soft. Takes more than hired guns to kill me when I've got someone like you coming home to. Eliza leaned into him, exhausted and aching and alive. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal against the rising sun. Ahead, home waited, damaged but standing, theirs. They'd survived. The question was what came next. What came next arrived faster than anyone expected, and it came with teeth. 2 days after they delivered Kincaid to the marshal, a lawyer showed up at the cabin. Expensive suit, polished shoes that had no business on a mountain trail, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Eliza and Rowan's entire property. Mrs. Blackridge? Mr. Blackridge? He didn't wait for an invitation, just stood there in their clearing like he owned it. My name is Howard Sinclair. I represent Mr. Darius Kincaid and Mountainside Development Corporation. I'm here to inform you that my client intends to pursue legal action against you for assault, false imprisonment, defamation, and interference with legitimate business operations. Eliza, who'd been feeding the chickens, set down the bucket slowly. Your client tried to burn down half the territory and murder my husband. Multiple times. My client denies those allegations completely. What he doesn't deny is that you physically attacked him and orchestrated his unlawful detention by local authorities. Sinclair pulled papers from his briefcase. We're prepared to file suit in territorial court. The damages we're seeking exceed $200,000. Rowan stepped out of the cabin, his arm still in a sling, but his presence solid. Get off our property. I'm simply delivering legal notice, Mr. Blackridge. You have 30 days to respond to a lawsuit filed by a man sitting in jail for arson and attempted murder? Eliza crossed her arms. I don't think so, Mr. Sinclair. I think what you're doing is trying to intimidate us into dropping the charges against your client. It's not going to work. Sinclair's smile was thin. Mrs. Blackridge, you may find that the legal system is more complicated than you imagine. My client has resources, connections, and a legal team that has successfully defended against far more serious allegations than these. Then he should have no trouble defending against them from a jail cell. Eliza took a step forward. But since you're here, you can take a message back to Kincaid. Tell him we have documentation of everything he's done. Every fraudulent contract, every payment to corrupt officials, every act of violence committed by his men. Tell him that documentation is already with federal prosecutors, and no amount of legal maneuvering is going to make it disappear. Those documents were obtained illegally through theft from private property. Those documents were obtained from my father's study, which I had every legal right to access as family property. Nice try, though. She smiled without warmth. Now get off our land before I add trespassing to the list of charges we're filing. Sinclair gathered his papers with stiff dignity. You're making a very serious mistake, Mrs. Blackridge. My client is a powerful man with powerful friends. You're a homesteader with no resources and no real legal standing. This won't end well for you. We'll see about that. After he left, Rowan looked at Eliza with concern. Can he actually sue us? He can try. Whether he'll win is another question. She sat down heavily on the porch steps. But Sinclair's right about one thing. This is going to get ugly. Kincaid has money for lawyers, for delays, for making the legal process as painful as possible. So what do? We fight. Same as we've been doing. She looked at him. But I need to go back to Helena. Talk to Arthur Webb, make sure the federal case is moving forward. And I need to find us a lawyer who can handle Sinclair. With what money? It was a fair question. They had savings, enough to get through winter, maybe buy supplies in spring, but nowhere near enough to hire the kind of lawyer who could stand up to Mountainside Development's legal team. I don't know yet, Eliza admitted, but I'll figure something out. The something came from an unexpected source. Eliza was in Helena 2 days later, coming out of Webb's office after a frustrating meeting where he'd explained that federal prosecutions took time and patience, and she'd have to trust the process, when a woman approached her on the street. She was well-dressed, maybe 40, with the kind of controlled anger that came from years of practice. Mrs. Blackridge? My name is Catherine Mills. I wonder if I might have a word. Eliza's hand went instinctively to the knife she'd started carrying. About what? About Darius Kincaid and the company he destroyed. Catherine gestured to a nearby cafe. Please, I'll buy you lunch and explain. Over weak coffee and surprisingly decent sandwiches, Catherine told her story. She'd been married to a man who owned a successful freight company in California. Kincaid had wanted to acquire it, had made generous offers that her husband refused. Then the offers stopped and the problems started. Delayed shipments, damaged goods, contracts mysteriously canceled. Within 6 months, the freight company was bankrupt. My husband killed himself, Catherine said flatly. Left a note saying he couldn't bear the shame of losing everything he'd built. That was 2 years ago. I've been trying to find a way to prove Kincaid was responsible ever since. I'm sorry, Eliza said quietly. Don't be sorry. Help me destroy him. Catherine leaned forward. I heard about what happened here. The fire, the violence, his arrest. I heard you have documentation of his methods. I want to see it. Eliza studied her carefully. Why? Because I have resources. Money, connections, access to lawyers who aren't afraid of Kincaid. And I have other victims, at least a dozen people across 3 territories who've been destroyed by Mountainside Development. If we coordinate, if we build a case together, we might actually be able to stop him. Might isn't certain. Nothing's certain, but it's better than fighting alone. Catherine pulled out a card. This is my lawyer. He's based in San Francisco, specializes in corporate fraud. He's expensive, but I'm willing to pay if you're willing to share what you have. Eliza looked at the card, then at Catherine. She saw the same thing she saw in her own mirror every morning. Someone who'd been underestimated, discarded, and had decided to become dangerous because of it. I'll need to discuss it with my husband. Of course, but Mrs. Blackridge? Catherine's smile was sharp. We're going to win this. You and me and everyone else he thought he could crush. We're going to take everything from him, and he's going to know exactly who did it. Rowan listened to the proposal that evening, his expression thoughtful. You trust her. I trust that she hates Kincaid as much as we do, and that her money plus our evidence might actually be enough to beat him in court. Eliza paced the cabin. But it means coordinating with people we don't know, trusting lawyers we've never met. It's risky. Everything about this has been risky. He shifted his injured arm carefully. But if she's offering help, maybe we should take it. We can't fight this alone forever. No, Eliza agreed. We can't. The coordination began immediately. Catherine's lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Marcus Brennan, arrived in Helena within a week. He reviewed the documentation Eliza had gathered, interviewed witnesses, and built what he called a compelling case of systematic fraud and racketeering. This is good, he said during a meeting in his temporary office. Really good. With the physical evidence from the arson, witness testimony from multiple homesteaders, and the financial documentation showing pattern of behavior, we can build both a criminal and civil case. How long? Eliza asked. The criminal case is moving through federal channels. That's out of my hands, but Webb seems competent enough. The civil case, that we can file immediately. Class action lawsuit on behalf of everyone Kincaid has damaged. We'll seek damages, injunctive relief, and complete dissolution of Mountainside Development Corporation. And the lawsuit he's threatening against us? Brennan smiled. Nuisance suit designed to intimidate. I'll file a motion to dismiss based on lack of merit. Even if it proceeds, it'll be tied up in procedural challenges for months. Don't worry about it. But Eliza did worry. Not about the lawsuit exactly, but about what it represented. Kincaid fighting back from jail, using every weapon at his disposal, refusing to accept defeat. The worry proved justified 3 weeks later when Rowan was served with papers summoning him to testify before a territorial grand jury investigating the circumstances of Kincaid's arrest. They're trying to flip it, Brennan explained. Make it look like you and the other homesteaders acted as vigilantes, that Kincaid was the victim of mob justice rather than lawful arrest. That's insane, Jack said. He'd come to the meeting along with Tom and Sarah. We turned him over to the marshal. We did everything by the book. Doesn't matter. Kincaid's lawyers are good at creating doubt. Brennan looked at Rowan. They're going to come at you hard during testimony, try to make you look violent, irrational, like someone who'd lie to protect illegal actions. Then I'll tell the truth, Rowan said simply. The truth isn't always enough when the other side has better lawyers. It'll have to be. The grand jury hearing was scheduled for early December. Eliza wanted to attend, but Brennan advised against it. They'll use your presence to suggest coaching or coordination. Better if Rowan testifies alone. So Eliza waited in Helena, pacing the hotel room they'd rented, imagining every possible way the testimony could go wrong. When Rowan finally returned 6 hours later, he looked exhausted but steady. How bad was it? She asked. Bad. Sinclair questioned me for 3 hours straight, trying to get me to contradict myself or admit we'd acted without proper authority. He sat down heavily. But I stuck to what happened, told them about the attacks, the evidence, the fact that we documented everything and turned it over to proper authorities. Did they believe you? Some of them. Maybe. He rubbed his face. The grand jury won't decide for a few days. Brennan says not to worry, but I can tell he's concerned. The decision came down a week later. No indictment against Rowan or any of the homesteaders for their actions in arresting Kincaid. But the grand jury also declined to indict Kincaid himself, citing insufficient evidence of criminal intent regarding the fire. This is political, Brennan said when they met to discuss the outcome. Someone got to the grand jury, convinced them that a territorial indictment would complicate the federal case. It's frustrating, but it doesn't actually hurt us. It lets Kincaid walk free, Eliza said. For now. But the federal case is still moving forward and our civil suit is solid. We're not done. But Kincaid, it seemed, thought he was done with them. 2 days after the grand jury decision, he posted bail, an astronomical sum that would have bankrupted most men but barely dented his resources, and left Helena. His lawyers issued a statement saying he was returning to San Francisco to oversee his business interests and looked forward to being vindicated in court. He's running, Jack said when they gathered at the cabin to discuss the news. Getting out while he still can. Maybe, Eliza said. Or maybe he's regrouping, planning his next move. She was right to be suspicious. The next move came in the form of a telegram from St. Louis. Eliza's father had died. Sudden heart failure, the message said, though it was vague on details. The funeral would be held in 3 days. As next of kin, Eliza was requested to attend for the reading of the will. It's a trap, Rowan said immediately. Probably, but it might also be real. Eliza stared at this telegram. My father wasn't a young man, and I know he had heart trouble. This could be legitimate. Or Kincaid could have arranged it to get you away from here, away from the protection of the community. Why would he bother? He's already out on bail, already back in San Francisco. I don't know, but I don't like it. Neither did Eliza, but she also couldn't ignore the possibility that her father had actually died. Whatever he'd done, whatever role he'd played in Kincaid's schemes, he was still her father. She had a right to be there. She took the train east 3 days later, leaving Rowan with strict instructions to stay safe and surrounded by neighbors. The journey felt longer than it had before, weighted with dread and a complicated grief she didn't want to examine too closely. St. Louis looked the same, The mansion looked the same. Her sister Charlotte greeted her at the door with red-rimmed eyes and a brittle smile. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Charlotte said. "I wasn't sure either." Eliza looked past her into the familiar entrance hall. Was it really his heart? The doctors said so. He was at his club playing cards and he just collapsed. Dead before anyone could get him to a hospital. Charlotte dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "The funeral is tomorrow. The will reading the day after."
I'm not here for the will, Charlotte. I don't want his money. Don't be stupid. Of course you want his money. We both do. Charlotte's voice dropped. He left debts, Eliza. Significant debts. The business is failing. If the will doesn't provide enough to cover them, we'll lose everything. Eliza felt a cold suspicion forming. What kind of debts? I don't know all the details. The lawyers have been vague, but apparently Father made some very bad investments in the past few years.
Something to do with Western development. Kincaid. What? Father invested heavily in Darius Kincaid's company, Mountainside Development Corporation. I have documentation of it. Eliza grabbed her sister's arm. Charlotte, when did he die? Exactly when? I told you 3 days ago at his club. What day? What time? Tuesday evening around 8 o'clock. Why does it Tuesday evening? The same day the grand jury had declined to indict Kincaid. The same day Kincaid's lawyers had issued their statement about him returning to San Francisco. The same day Kincaid would have learned that the federal case was proceeding and his primary investor's daughter had evidence that could destroy them both. It wasn't his heart, Eliza said quietly. Kincaid had him killed. Charlotte went white. That's insane. Father died of natural causes. The doctors confirmed doctors can be paid to confirm anything, and Kincaid needed Father silenced before he could testify or make a deal with prosecutors. Eliza's mind was racing. The debts, the failing business, that's all Kincaid pulling his money out, destroying Father's finances so there's nothing left to seize as part of a criminal case. You can't possibly believe. I can and I do. Eliza released her sister's arm. Where are Father's personal papers, his recent correspondence? In his study, I suppose. The lawyers sealed it pending the will reading. Unseal it. Eliza, I can't just... Charlotte. Eliza looked at her sister directly. Father was murdered. If I'm right, there will be evidence in his study. Letters, telegrams, something showing communication with Kincaid or his associates in the days before he died. We need to find it before the lawyers do, because if they're working for Kincaid, that evidence will disappear. Charlotte stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, she nodded. I have a key. Come on. They went through Father's study like thieves, working quickly and quietly while the house slept. Eliza knew what to look for. Anything dated in the past month, anything mentioning Kincaid or Mountainside Development. She found it in a locked drawer in the desk. Recent telegrams, still in their envelopes. The first was from Kincaid, sent 2 weeks ago. Federal investigation expanding. Need your testimony concerning investment structure. Will arrange protection if you cooperate with authorities. The second was her father's response. Cannot testify. Would implicate myself. Suggest we discuss alternative arrangements. The third was from Kincaid again, sent the day before her father died. No alternatives available. You will testify as directed or face consequences. Meeting arranged for Tuesday evening, your club, 8 p.m. Come alone. Eliza's hand shook as she read them. He went to meet Kincaid or Kincaid's people, and he never came back. This proves murder, Charlotte whispered. This proves Father was threatened and died shortly after. It's not quite the same thing, but it's close enough to open an investigation. Eliza tucked the telegrams into her coat. I need to get these to the police, tonight. At this hour, they'll never... They will if I make enough noise. The St. Louis police were skeptical at first, but the telegrams got their attention. By morning, they'd opened an investigation into her father's death. By afternoon, they'd discovered that the doctor who'd pronounced him dead had recently received a large payment from an account traced back to one of Kincaid's shell companies. By evening, warrants had been issued for Darius Kincaid's arrest on suspicion of murder. Eliza received the news via telegram while sitting in her father's study, surrounded by the wreckage of his empire. Charlotte had collapsed into numb shock. The lawyers were scrambling to protect themselves. and Eliza felt nothing but a cold satisfaction that justice was finally catching up. She sent a telegram to Rowan. Father murdered by Kincaid. Warrants issued. Coming home. His response arrived an hour later. Stay safe. We're waiting. She took the first train west the next morning, leaving Charlotte to handle the funeral and the lawyers and the slow dissolution of everything their father had built on corruption and greed. She didn't feel guilty about leaving. Charlotte had chosen to stay in that world. Eliza had chosen to leave it. The journey west felt different this time, lighter, like she was shedding the last remnants of who she'd been expected to be and becoming fully who she'd chosen to become. She arrived in Helena to find Rowan waiting at the station with Jack and Sarah. The sight of them, solid, real, hers, made something tight in her chest finally loosen. It's over, Rowan said, pulling her into a careful embrace. Kincaid was arrested in San Francisco 2 days ago. Murder charges, federal fraud charges, conspiracy charges. Brennan says he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Good. Eliza leaned into him, breathing in the familiar smell of pine and wood smoke that clung to his clothes. What about the civil suit? Mountainside Development Corporation filed for bankruptcy, all assets being liquidated to pay damages to victims. Catherine Mills is coordinating the distribution. Jack grinned. We're going to get restitution, all of us, enough to rebuild, make improvements, really establish ourselves. And the other homesteaders, the ones who lost property, getting their land back, contracts voided, titles restored, everything Kincaid stole is being returned. Sarah's smile was fierce. We won, Eliza. Actually won. They rode back to the mountain together, talking and laughing and making plans. The cabin appeared through the trees just as the sun was setting, painting everything gold and purple. Home. Over the next months, the legal machinery ground forward. Kincaid was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Her father's estate was seized to pay restitution to victims. The territorial governor launched reforms to prevent similar corruption. And slowly, carefully, the homesteaders began to rebuild. Eliza and Rowan used their restitution money to expand the cabin, add a proper barn, buy better livestock. The garden grew larger. The property became not just survivable, but prosperous. Other families, hearing about the victory over Kincaid, moved to the territory and built their own homesteads. The community grew stronger. One spring morning, nearly a year after Kincaid's arrest, Eliza stood in the garden planting early vegetables and felt Rowan's arms come around her from behind. You're thinking too hard, he said. I'm thinking about how far we've come. She straightened, leaning back against him. A year and a half ago, I was being shipped west like unwanted cargo. Now I'm standing in my garden on my property, planning next season's crops. Our property. Our garden. He turned her around to face him. And maybe planning for more than just crops. She looked at him questioningly. I've been thinking, he said carefully, about what you said last year. About children. About family. He put his hand on her waist. I think I'd like that. If you still would. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind this time. I would. Very much. Good. Because I want to build something that lasts. Not just a homestead, but a legacy. Something that says we were here, we mattered, we survived. We did more than survive, Eliza said softly. We won. That summer, Catherine Mills came to visit. She'd sold her property in California and bought land in the valley, planning to start fresh where the air was clean and the corruption hadn't yet taken root. They sat on the cabin porch, drinking coffee and watching the mountains turn purple in the evening light. I heard from the prosecutor, Catherine said. Your father's estate is completely liquidated. Everything he owned went to paying back the people Kincaid destroyed. Good. You don't seem bothered by it. That was your inheritance. I didn't want his money. I just wanted him to face consequences. Eliza set down her cup. He spent my whole life making me feel worthless because of how I looked. Then he tried to use me as a tool in his schemes. The fact that his empire collapsed and I'm the one who brought it down, that's all the inheritance I need. Catherine laughed. You're terrifying. You know that? I know. Took me a while to figure it out, but I know. By autumn, Eliza was pregnant. Not an easy pregnancy. She was sick constantly in the first months, uncomfortable and exhausted.
but wanted, chosen. Rowan hovered protectively until she finally snapped at him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. "I hauled water and split wood and fought armed men while not pregnant," she said. "I can manage growing a baby. I just want you safe." "I am safe. We both are. That's what we fought for, remember? The right to be safe in our own home." The baby came in early spring during a late snowstorm that trapped them in the cabin for 3 days. Sarah Chen served as midwife, calm and competent, while Eliza labored and Rowan paced nervously in the next room. A daughter, small, perfect, with Rowan's dark hair and Eliza's stubborn expression even in sleep. "What do we name her?" Rowan asked, holding her with the careful terror of a new father. "Hope," Eliza said without hesitation. "Because that's what she is. Proof that we can build something good out of everything that tried to destroy us." Word spread quickly through the homesteader community. Visitors arrived bearing gifts, hand-carved rattles, knitted blankets, offers of help. Jack and Tom built a cradle. Sarah sewed tiny clothes. Catherine brought books because she insisted every child should grow up surrounded by stories. On a warm afternoon in May, they held a gathering in the clearing. Not a formal christening. Neither Eliza nor Rowan were religious, but a welcoming. A way of saying to their community, "This is our daughter. This is our future. This is what we protected when we fought." Jack raised a glass of whiskey. "To Hope Blackridge. May she grow up in a world where justice actually works and powerful men face consequences." "To Hope," everyone echoed. Eliza held her daughter and looked around at the faces gathered in her clearing. People who'd fought beside her, bled beside her, refused to break when breaking would have been easier. People who'd become family in ways her blood relatives never had. "Thank you," she said quietly, "all of you, for standing with us, for believing we could win when it seemed impossible." "You led us," Tom said. "You showed us how to fight back." "We fought together. That's the only reason it worked." She looked at Rowan, who stood beside her with his hand on her shoulder. "None of us could have done this alone." The gathering continued into the evening, music and laughter, and the kind of joy that came from surviving something terrible and coming out stronger. As the sun set and the mountains turned gold, Eliza found a quiet moment on the porch, Hope sleeping in her arms. She thought about the girl she'd been in St. Louis. Scared, ashamed, convinced she was too much of everything wrong and not enough of anything right. That girl was gone, transformed by hard work and harder choices into someone she actually liked being. She thought about her father, dead and disgraced, his empire collapsed into nothing. Part of her felt guilty about that, but mostly she felt free. Free of his expectations, his disappointment, his small, cruel certainty that she would never be enough. She thought about Kincaid, rotting in prison, all his power and money reduced to nothing by people he'd thought were beneath him. There was satisfaction in that, deep, fierce satisfaction. But mostly she thought about the future, about Hope growing up strong and confident, never doubting her worth, about the community they'd built, homesteaders supporting each other instead of being picked off one by one, about the garden that would need planting in a few weeks, and the barn that needed a new roof, and all the ordinary work of living a life that mattered. Rowan came out and sat beside her. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Thinking too hard." He put his arm around her shoulders. "What about?" "About how I'm not the same person my father sent away. About how this," she gestured to the cabin, the clearing, the mountains beyond, "is more than he ever imagined I could have." "It's more than I imagined I could have," Rowan said quietly. "Before you came, I was just surviving, going through motions. You made this a life worth living. We made it together." "Yeah, we did." Inside, someone started playing a fiddle. Laughter drifted through the open windows. Hope stirred in Eliza's arms, made a small sound, then settled back into sleep. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd refused?" Rowan asked. "If you'd stayed in St. Louis, found some other way?" "Sometimes. But then I look at this." She nodded at their daughter, their home, their life. "And I know I wouldn't change anything. Even the hard parts, even the terrifying parts, because they led here. To a mountain cabin in the middle of nowhere. To a home, to family, to mattering." She leaned into him.
My father sent me here to disappear. Instead, I became someone people couldn't ignore, someone who fought back and won, someone who built something real. You built yourself, Rowan corrected gently. I just gave you space to do it. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out one by one, brilliant against the mountain darkness. Tomorrow would bring work. There was always work. But tonight was for rest, for joy, for remembering how far they'd come. Years later, when people asked Eliza about her life, about how a society girl from St. Louis became a legend of the Montana Territory, she never told them about the hardship or the fear. She never talked about being sent away in shame or the battles fought to keep what they'd built. Instead, she talked about strength, about learning that her body, once her greatest source of shame, was actually her greatest asset, about discovering that the qualities her father had called flaws, her stubbornness, her directness, her refusal to be small and quiet, were exactly what she needed to survive and thrive. She talked about community, about people standing together against forces that wanted to divide and conquer them, about the power of refusing to be alone. And she talked about choice, about how her father had tried to choose her fate, but in the end, she'd chosen it herself. She'd chosen Rowan, chosen this life, chosen to fight instead of surrender. Were you scared? People would ask. Terrified, she'd answer honestly. But I did it anyway. That's the secret. You do it anyway. Hope grew up strong and fearless, running through the mountains like she owned them, learning to shoot and track and survive from both parents. She never knew what it felt like to be ashamed of her body or apologize for taking up space. That legacy, Eliza thought, was worth more than any inheritance her father could have left. The homestead prospered. More families came, drawn by stories of the community that had stood up to corruption and won. The territory grew, gained statehood eventually, became civilized in the ways that mattered while keeping its wild heart. Eliza and Rowan grew old together. He never fully regained full use of his arm after that second injury, but he learned to work around it. She developed arthritis in her hands from all those years of hard labor, but she kept working anyway. They built additions onto the cabin, taught their daughter and eventually their grandchildren the skills to survive and thrive in mountain country. On quiet evenings, they'd sit on the porch they'd built together and watch the sun set over land they'd fought to keep. Rowan would take her hand, the one with the crooked fingers and permanent calluses, and hold it like it was precious. No regrets? He'd ask sometimes. None, she'd answer. Not one. And it was true, because Eliza Blackridge had learned something her father never understood. Worth wasn't measured in appearance or approval. It was measured in what you built, who you stood with, and whether you left the world better than you found it. She'd been sent to disappear. Instead, she'd become unforgettable. She'd been meant to fail. Instead, she'd won everything that mattered. And when people asked how she'd done it, how one woman had helped bring down a corrupt empire and built a legacy that lasted generations, her answer was always the same. I survived. And then I decided that surviving wasn't enough. I wanted to live, really live. Everything else followed from that choice. The mountains stood eternal, indifferent to human struggles. But in the shadow of those mountains, in a clearing carved from wilderness, a family thrived. A community flourished. And a woman who'd been told she was too much of everything wrong proved that she was exactly enough of everything right. That was Eliza's story. Not a tale of rescue or redemption, but of recognition, of finally seeing herself clearly and liking what she saw. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.